the Leper King. Welcome back, brave explorers of impossible worlds. We are excited to have you here to continue this odyssey together. Before we continue, everything you'll hear is pure fiction. So please don't try to replicate combat techniques at home. This wonderful story in all its rights belong to its brilliant original author. We are only the messengers of entertainment. Want another dose of adventure? Subscribe to our YouTube channel so you don't miss a single chapter. And if you can't wait, our Patreon has exclusive surprises you'll love. Chapter 26, Engines of God. The workshop beneath the Tower of David buzzed with a low, methodical rhythm of men shaping iron and wood. Shafts clattered into sorting bins. Coils of rope hung in loops from ceiling beams. The scent of pine resin and forge smoke settled thick in the air. In the center of the chamber, flanked by lamps and parchment drawings, stood two models, each unlike anything the Holy Land had seen. Balian, still in dust-covered riding boots from a circuit of the Eastern patrols, stepped forward and ran a hand along the wooden spine of the larger machine. Dozens of tightly packed arrow shafts rusted in individual slots along a shallow wooden platform set at a steep angle. Below it, a sliding rack and a link torsion crank waited for demonstration. "This is your new miracle?" Balian asked, skeptical but not dismissive. Ethan grinned faintly. "Not a miracle. A repeatable mechanism. It's based on a Roman war engine, but this version is entirely mechanical. No fire." He gestured toward the loaded frame. "Spring tension arms beneath the rack. A rotating cam pulls them back evenly. Then a release catch looses all the bolts at once. 50 arrows in a spread." Balian gave a low whistle. "No smoke. Just death." "Exactly," Ethan said. "Quiet, sudden, and devastating. Perfect for shocking a mass charge or breaking siege formations. It's a volley machine, not a ranged one. It's not going to shoot 100 paces, but at 50 or 60, the bolts hit like a storm." "Can it be reloaded fast, with trained crews?" 5 minutes. "Each arrow is short-fletched and fire-hardened. Some we wrap in oilcloth for fire use, but only if the wind favors us." He walked to the side and picked up a sample bolt, shorter than a crossbow quarrel, thicker than a standard arrow, the iron tip wicked and flanged. "This one punches through wood shields," he said, handing it to Balian. The Lord of Ibelin weighed it in his palm. "Feels heavy good," Ethan said. "It shouldn't feel safe." They moved across the workshop to the smaller-scale fortress mock-up, laid out on a slate table with models of battlements and towers carved from limestone. Ethan set down 4 miniature siege engines, identical to the prototype behind them, counterweight trebuchets, with tapered throwing arms and lead-weighted slings. "You've seen the weight trebuchet before," Ethan said. "But now we mount them permanently on walls, just like I said." It crack. He gestured to the model. "We build wooden overhangs with stone ballast beneath. Each one is fitted with a protected mechanism, pivot axle, counterweight box, and reinforced throwing arm. Reload is slow, 1 shot every 3 or 4 minutes, but each stone will weigh over 100 pounds. One hit from above will shatter siege towers, crush rams, even break command tents." Balian raised an eyebrow. "And you'd build them on top of the walls?" "Yes," Ethan replied. "It's no longer enough to wait out a siege. We control the battlefield, from elevation." "And these," Balian motioned back to the volley launcher, "you'd place where? Wall recesses, inner courtyards, city gates. Even open field positions if we have time to dig in. I want 5 per fortress, minimum. 2 on the outer walls, 3 in mobile carts that can be wheeled between levels." Balian frowned thoughtfully. "Do we have that many carpenters?" "We will. I've hired a dozen from Tripoli and another 20 from Nablus. I've tasked Hugo to draft a training corps, engineers, not just soldiers. Apprentices, too. They'll learn to maintain torsion ropes, tension arms, and gears. Each engine will have its own crew." "And what will you call this monstrosity?" Ethan smirked. "I'll call it a storm. The name should inspire dread." Balian gave a small, grim chuckle. "I think it will." Late that evening, the engineers staged a field test in the old Roman stadium outside Jerusalem's eastern walls. A single storm, mounted on a wheeled platform, was rolled into position, flanked by 2 wooden barricades and lit by torchlight. A dozen short-range straw dummies stood arranged in staggered rows downfield. The crew stepped into place. Ethan and Balian watched from the parapet above. "Signal ready." Ethan called. The lever ratcheted backward with a sharp series of clicks as the cam engaged the torsion springs. The line pulled taut. Release with a deep thump. 50 iron-tip bolts snapped forward in a devastating wave. The arrows fanned outward in a high arc before slamming into the dummies. 7 collapsed instantly. The rest bristled with shafts. Dust billowed. Silence followed from above, Balian spoke first. They won't know what hit them. Ethan said nothing for a moment. The wind tugged at his cloak, catching in the firelight. It's not about fear, he said finally. It's about buying time. Every volley, every shot from a wall, it gives us one more hour, one more day. Time for relief to arrive. Time for settlers to evacuate. Time to decide the war. Balian turned. You're thinking like a man who expects to be besieged. I'm thinking like a man who knows it will happen eventually, Ethan replied. And I intend to be ready. Chapter 27, The Book of Peter's Throne. The roads into Rome wore down even the most patient travelers, and Cardinal Odo di Castellari was not known for patience. After weeks at sea and another of bone-jarring carts through the spine of Italy, he entered the holy city beneath the weight of heat, dust, and expectation. But the wooden chest resting across his knees on the final stretch was what truly weighed on him. It bore no crest, only a stamped cross with flared arms and a symbol now seared into Odo's memory, a stylized fish, carved from walnut, its eye formed from a single inlaid garnet. Inside was the first complete copy of a Bible unlike any the world had seen. One produced not by monkish hands in candlelit scriptoria, but by pressure and iron and ink. A Bible born of wood and vision, from a king touched by both affliction and something stranger in its name, Liber Petri, the Book of Peter's Throne. Odo passed through the bronze gates of the Lateran Palace with a chest in tow. He did not ask permission. He did not need to. He was expected in the Pope's private study. The air was cool beneath stone arches and tapestries. It was early evening, and the light filtering through the high clear-story windows had taken on the amber softness of approaching dusk. Pope Alexander I stood waiting, robed in white, flanked by two aides but otherwise alone. Odo, the Pope said quietly, without smile or scorn. You return. I do, Holiness, Odo said, his voice a mixture of awe and fatigue. And I bring you something extraordinary. He motioned to the chest, which two squires unlatched and opened slowly. Pope Alexander approached. Nestled inside was the Liber Petri. The cover was dark olive wood, polished until it gleamed like river stone. Brass inlays traced a ringed cross around a seat of keys, Peter's keys, flanked by vines. When the Pope touched it, he felt the smoothness of a surface prepared not for opulence, but permanence. A gift, the Pope asked. A testimony, Odo replied. Commissioned by King Baldwin of Jerusalem. He called it a gift not to a man, but to the chair you keep. To the throne of Peter itself. The Pope looked down at the book for a long moment before gently opening it. Within lay the book of Matthew, rendered in clear, elegant Latin. The ink sat cleanly on smooth parchment, and the margins bore stamped embellishments, gold leaf halos, crosses, and marginalia in soft green ink, stylized fish and boats and lamps. The pages turned easily. Each was identical in proportion, spacing, and form. The text was uniform, without drift or fading. This is printed, the Pope asked. Yes, Holiness. By press. They carve letters in blocks, soon they'll use movable ones cast in lead. It allows for perfect duplication. This is not a scribe's labor. It is a craftsman's. A printer's gospel, Alexander murmured. No, Odo corrected. A bishop's. A pope's. A teacher's, one day. But the hands that built it do not belong to heretics or rebels. They belong to men sworn to your see. And yet, this comes from a boy king in the East, the Pope said, turning another page. Who has once known more for his illness than whose strength he has changed, Holiness. His affliction remains, but there is something new in him. I saw it in his bearing, in his counsel, in his works. He speaks as one who remembers the fall of kingdoms yet unwritten. He governs not for survival, but for continuity. Alexander did not reply at once. He turned to a page illuminated with a scene of Peter receiving the keys from Christ. The detail was unlike any manuscript the church had ever produced, clean, bold, yet reverent. The style was new, but the spirit was ancient. You say he sent this as a testimony, the Pope said. Yes. And more. He asks for your blessing, not only for the book, but for what it represents. And what is that? A foundation, Odo answered. A kingdom that does not wait for Europe to come to its aid, but instead builds from within. Not merely with stone or sword, but with order, with understanding. With books like this. With ideas not yet born in our cities. Alexander closed the Liber Petri and stepped away. He folded his arms behind his back and walked slowly across the study. Outside, bells rang faintly from the Lateran Basilica. The shadows lengthen. No schools have been built, Odo said, anticipating his concern. No universities. Not yet. But he speaks of such things, not as dreams, but as plans. Practical ones. He speaks of scribes and grammarians, of laws written in both tongues, of noble sons taught in halls rather than tents, and the clergy, the Pope asked, they remain respected. Odo replied. He has not usurped the pulpit. He prays. He hears the Mass. But, he speaks of reason and healing in the same breath as faith. The common folk look to him now not only for justice, but wisdom. The Pope considered this, and what do the bishops of Outremer say? They are uncertain, Odo admitted. But they are also tired, Holiness. Tired of defending a kingdom that Europe barely remembers. Baldwin offers them not just hope, but tools. Roads. Clean streets. Guards who obey command, not coin. Alexander returned to the chest and gazed again upon the closed gospel. And you believe this is the future? He asked. I believe it could be, Odo said. But only if it remains tied to Rome. If it grows apart, it may bloom into something dangerous. If we guide it, if you guide it, it may become a light silence settled again, deep and papery like the pages within the book. At last, the Pope spoke. This book shall remain here. Not hidden, but studied. I will convene with the College of Cardinals. This is no ordinary matter. If a new method of preserving the word is upon us, we must ensure it remains uncorrupted. Odo bowed low. And you, Odo, the Pope said, will remain my eye in the east as you command, Holiness. Alexander looked once more at the cover of the Liber Petri and said quietly, if this book is the beginning of something, then may it begin with blessing, not rebellion. That night, as the lamps were lit in the Vatican and the streets of Rome settled into twilight quiet, the Pope sat alone in his chamber with the gospel on his lap. He turned to Luke's words, the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, which grew and became a tree, and the birds of the air nested in its branches. Alexander read the line again, then closed the book and said, let us see what takes root. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 28, The Red Mantles Gather. The College of Cardinals assembled within the Apostolic Palace 2 mornings after Pope Alexander I first laid eyes on the Liber Petri. They gathered not on the Lateran Cathedral, but in the cloistered hall beneath the library, where frescoes faded with age and the scent of beeswax clung to every velvet-draped surface. 14 men in red sat at a long oak table, its surface polished smooth by centuries of elbows, candlesticks, and spilled ink. The Pope did not attend this session in person. He had commissioned debate, not dictated decree. Instead, his instructions were clear: study what had come from Jerusalem. Question it. Weigh it. Fear it. If necessary. At the center of the table rested the book Liber Petri, the Book of Peter's throne. A single candle guttered beside it, casting flickering light on the brass filigree that framed the olive wood cover. The red hats watched it in silence for a time, as if expecting the book to whisper to them. It was Cardinal Cosimo della Scala, the Florentine, who broke the silence. This was not copied by hand, he said. His voice was sand on stone. No, Cardinal Fulbert of Reims replied. It was printed. Stamped by iron. Or so the letter says. He tapped the parchment that had accompanied the book. Cardinal Otto di Castellari's personal report to the Pope. It lay unfolded beside the Bible, written in crisp Latin, scribed in a tight, practiced hand mass production of the Gospel, scoffed Cardinal Elidonimus, the youngest among them. That is a privilege of monks. A holy duty, a duty we may be unable to fulfill, murmured Cardinal Rodrigo of Zamora. Our monasteries cannot keep up. One copy of the Gospels takes a year or more to produce. This, he pointed at the book, can be made in weeks, and if it can be copied, it can be falsified, countered Fulbert. Imagine this. Printing press in the hands of heretics. Gospels redrawn in their own language. Tainted doctrines multiplied before a bishop could stop them. The scriptures were written in Greek and Hebrew before they were ever Latin, muttered Cosimo. The word is not the ink, but the truth it carries. Elis jaw stiffened. You would permit the peasant to read the mysteries of God. I would permit him to read the parable of the Good Samaritan, Cosimo snapped. And learn to love his neighbor better than we do. The tension rose like mist off warm stone. Only Cardinal Otto di Castellari remained silent. He watched the others with his fingers pressed to his lips, his eyes fixed on the book, his book, now passed around like a suspicious relic. At length, Cardinal Bernard de Albano, the dean of the college, raised a hand. We are not gathered to debate the authority of the Vulgate, he said calmly, nor to canonize or condemn King Baldwin's soul. We are here to weigh the impact of what has been done. And what could be done. He opened the Liber Petri and turned to a random page, the Acts of the Apostles. The words were uniform, exact. He held it up. This is cleaner than any manuscript I have seen. Faster to read. Easier to teach from. It is not merely useful, it is perfected. The monks will not approve, said Rodrigo. They are not the church, Bernard replied. They serve it. And if this spreads, asked Fulbert. If the press becomes common? Will every merchant print his own psalter? Will every priest become a printer? Perhaps, Cosimo said. And perhaps the word will go where it could not before. Into places where monks do not tread. Into hearts who never hear mass. Perhaps. The kingdom of God will be sown more widely. Ellie exhaled hard. And what of Baldwin? This boy king who builds things faster than we can name them. He writes treatises of roads, patrols, order, and settlers. He defies the decay of the East by sheer will. But what is the source of his fire? No one says at this. Odo finally spoke. It is not heresy that drives him, he said quietly. Nor rebellion. It is urgency. The kind born of someone who has seen too much death and refuses to let the kingdom rot quietly. All heads turn to him. He still attends mass, Odo continued. He still honors Rome. But he moves fast. Too fast, perhaps. There is something inside him, a memory that doesn't belong to his time. But whatever it is, it serves Jerusalem now. And he looks to Rome to guide it, not block it. Cosimo leaned forward. Then we must consider, will we become his ballast, or his rudder? Cardinal Bernard closed the Bible gently. I believe we are at a beginning, he said. A seed, not yet sprouted. This press, this book, may change everything, or nothing. But it is ours to shepherd now. Rome must not fear tools that preserve the word of God. There was a murmur of assent. But we will proceed cautiously, Bernard continued. No press in Europe may operate without sanction. No translations may be made without oversight. And no further works may be sent abroad without ecclesiastical review. And what of Baldwin? Asked Rodrigo. What of his movement? We watch, Bernard said. And we write back. With a blessing and boundaries. The vote was taken. 10-4 in favor. The Liber Petri would be preserved, studied, and duplicated, slowly, under papal supervision. And Cardinal Odo would return east, bearing Rome's first cautious endorsement of a king who spoke with a silver mask and built with the hands of a century yet unborn. Chapter 29, Patterns in Motion. The sun rose over Jerusalem with a quiet dignity, gilding the limestone walls with a golden shimmer that always seemed to defy the reality within. Ethan stood at the high window of the northern bastion, his wrapped hand resting on the stone ledge, watching the city breathe. Beneath him, life stirred, porters moving crates of linen, Templar patrols cycling from the barracks, and merchants opening their stalls along the Holy Sepulchre's western wall. The lesion on his forearm no longer bled. It no longer itched. Gerard's mold salve, refined over weeks from the green spores originally scraped from rotting bread and cultured in clay pots behind the infirmary, had begun to do what neither prayer nor poultice had managed. Each morning brought less pain, less discoloration. It had not reversed the leprosy, but it had slowed it. Visibly Gerard had whispered over the bandages that morning, "It is divine, my king. A mercy given to your flesh. We must honor it." Ethan hadn't corrected him. Whether miracle or mold, the result mattered more than the source. He had no time for celebration. There was too much to build in the courtyard of the Holy Citadel, beneath a newly constructed timber awning. Ethan reviewed hand-drawn maps with Balian and Odo de Saint Amand. The maps were growing crowded with new symbols, small black dots for watchposts, blue crosses for canals, spirals for windmill sites, and squares for granaries. The most ambitious of his early efforts, the paper mill and printing press, had stabilized. Paper flowed from the mill in the Kidron Valley in small but regular quantities, thanks to a steady supply of linen rags from Jaffa and Acre. The press now printed 5 to 10 sheets per day, some scripture, some letters, others draft copies of tax forms and land grants. The work was slow, but the system had teeth. The Liber Petri, hand-bound and already in Rome, had proven what could be done. Now came the harder part, everything else. Balian pointed to the coast on the parchment map. The canal projects near Jaffa. They're behind schedule, he said. The brick molds failed again? Ethan asked. No, just manpower. Too few skilled masons. Too much reliance on conscripts. Ethan nodded. Shift the better laborers from Acre. Delay the windmill at Beth Shean if needed. He turned to Odo and the mountain road reinforcement. Progressing, Odo said. We've reinforced 2 key switchbacks north of Hebron. We'll start on the 3rd next week. The archway supports are holding, and the mule teams can manage heavier loads. That mattered more than it sounded. Roads that could bear iron carts meant easier transport of lumber, stone, food, and eventually settlers. The settler initiative, however, was still embryonic. Ethan had begun offering small grants of land, 2 acres here, 5 there, to loyal knights and second sons, on the condition they built a dwelling, dug a well, and maintained contact with local patrol routes. A few dozen had accepted the offer. Most still hesitated. They fear isolation, Balian said plainly. And raids. Then we give them walls before homes, Ethan said. Palisades. Small towers. Defensive outposts with central granaries. They'll feel safer if they can see strength with their own eyes. He looked at a marked point southeast of Ascalon, an empty square with the label Novi Colonia scrawled beside it. If one of those towns survives through next spring, the others will follow by late afternoon. Ethan visited the trebuchet yard outside the city's southern gate. The sun glared off unfinished timber frames and tension cables wrapped in ox hide. 3 of the massive counterweight machines stood partially constructed, their slings tested but uncalibrated. The master engineer, a grizzled man named Lucien of Limoges, greeted Ethan with a stiff nod. She's throwing clean now, Lucien said, motioning toward the largest machine. Last stone flew straight 400 paces. More with a heavier load. How's accuracy? Ethan asked. Lucien grimaced. Still 2 days away from confidence. Right now, she could hide a tower, or a cow. Ethan smirked. Keep tuning. I want her deadly at Gaza before year's end. Beside the trebuchets, young apprentices were assembling the mechanical frame of the multi-arrow launchers, rebranded as storm racks, their names simplified for use by both Frank and local commanders. The devices used taut torsion cords, wound tight with winches, to fire short iron-tipped darts in loose volleys. The darts were lightweight and spread wide, meant more to scatter charges and break cavalry formations than pierce armor. Each launcher was hand-cranked and took time to reload, but their presence atop walls and near gates lent the illusion of overwhelming firepower. Illusion, Ethan knew, was a kind of weapon. Storm racks go to Ascalon first, Ethan told Lucien. Then Gaza. Then Jerusalem. You expect a siege? Lucien asked. I expect time to run out, Ethan replied. That evening, Ethan returned to the scriptorium. The monks and scribes worked in gentle candlelight now, aided by tallow lamps suspended from wood beams. Anselm oversaw 2 parallel lines of printing, sacred text and administrative documents. The first supported the church. The second supported the kingdom. He inspected a fresh page, legal code in clear Latin, written in 2 columns, not parchment, not vellum paper. The seal of the Kingdom of Jerusalem had been pressed into the bottom corner in red wax. He ran a thumb over it. This was permanence, not of walls, not of swords, of words. As the moon rose and the bells rang for Compline, Ethan stood again at his window. He could see the faint glow of torches outside the walls, where laborers still worked on granary foundations and stone bathhouses. The sound of the city was different now. It wasn't quiet, but it wasn't frantic. It was a city in motion. Every stone laid, every field sown, every cartload of linen or lime or grain was another inch of future gained. It wasn't finished, it wasn't even close, but it was beginning to live. And Ethan, behind his mask, breathed in the air of it, dusty, bitter, and utterly real. Chapter 30, The Scent of Smoke. Saladin Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known in the courts of Cairo and Damascus simply as Saladin, stood at the edge of the red fort-shaded balcony, looking west. From this height above the Nile's bend, the river stretched silver and serene through the lowland groves of Giza. But his thoughts were not on the water. His thoughts, like too many of late, were on Jerusalem. He was not alone. Abu al-Karim, his spymaster, bowed slightly behind him, holding a sealed scroll still damp from the wax. More letters from Gaza, Abu al-Karim said. Saladin gestured for him to read. The Franks are building siege machines not for war, he said carefully, but for demonstration. Their machines throw stones beyond 400 paces. Their prince rides masked. Some say he is dying. Some say he is not the same man. Saladin said nothing. Their paper-making has begun in the valley east of the city. A market for it is already forming. In acre paper, Saladin echoed. Not parchment, yes. White sheets like the Persians use, but thicker. Their scribes sell them to pilgrims. Scripture, stories, rumors. Abu al-Karim opened the scroll and showed it, a crude Latin poster with hand-lettered calligraphy, sealed with a Jerusalem cross. Saladin took it. The words meant little to him, but he recognized the implication immediately. Uniformity. Repetition. Printing. Have they discovered how to multiply the written word? He asked. They have. Like China, perhaps, though their method is cruder. And do we know the source of this discovery? Abu al-Karim hesitated. That is where the rumors multiply. Saladin turned. Speak plainly. The masked king, Baldwin. His illness continues, but he does not slow. The Armenians whisper he is possessed. Others say he has dreams of the future. He drinks willow water for pain. Eats no pork. Burns herbs and browns dishes, and he has built canals in Jaffa. Has ordered stone bathhouses for the poor. He trades not only coin, but paper notes between strongholds. His knights write contracts. Saladin's brows knit together. The Franks do not write contracts. They carve with swords. Not this king. Saladin took a slow breath, his fingers closing around the printed poster. He remembered Baldwin IV from years ago. A boy with sunburned cheeks and a flickering intelligence in his eyes. Even then, there had been something different about him. He had defied despair, but this sounded like something more. A ghost, he murmured. Or a prophet. He looked again at the Latin poster. It bore not a royal decree, but a passage, likely biblical, set in 2 columns, clean and symmetrical. A man who builds roads and bathhouses is no fool, he said. A man who multiplies scripture by press is a threat to our order. Later that day, Saladin summoned his senior emirs to a private war council in the garden chamber of the citadel. The air was cool beneath a lattice of carved cedar, and the scent of sandalwood hung in the air. Baldwin, lean and sharp-eyed, leaned forward. First we must test his defenses. He cannot defend all fronts. He already has, said Taki, the governor of Gaza. He fortified the citadel with foreign engineers. Byzantines are aiding him now. They've seen his machines. They speak of settlers and grain stores. They say he's preparing not for war, but for endurance. Then we must break that endurance. Baldwin snapped. Saladin raised a hand. No. Not yet. They turned to him. If this man, this Baldwin, is indeed building a kingdom that can survive, then we must understand it before we try to crush it. He moved to the low table and unrolled a map of the Levant. A thick line traced the coast, with small tokens marking Jerusalem, Acre, Jaffa, and Ascalon. We are not at war. Not today, he said. Gaza's wounds are still healing. But I want observers in every port, every caravan, every border hamlet. I want to know what flows in and what flows out, grain, coin, paper, words. He pointed to Jaffa. This town now sells vegetables in winter. Why? He gestured to Acre. Pilgrims carry not only relics, but contracts and copied gospels. Why? And then Jerusalem, a king half dead and blind with swords, commands windmills, roads, and treaties. Why? There was silence. Saladin stood slowly. This king may be mad. Or he may be something far more dangerous. He glanced at Abu al-Karim. Do we have someone in Acre? Yes, a merchant's son from Tyre. Trusted. Writes in Latin good. I want him close to the scribes. Watch what they print. Especially if it speaks of Rome or Constantinople. He turned again to the emirs. We will wait. But we will watch like hawks. If this Baldwin is reshaping his kingdom, he may soon reshape our world. That night, Saladin sat alone on the rooftop of his chamber, watching the stars over Cairo. The dome of the Al-Azhar shone beneath the moonlight, a pale reflection of knowledge and continuity. He thought of Baghdad, of Cordoba, of cities that had once dreamed too far and too fast, and now a leper king, with trembling hands and foreign words, dreamed again. Madness, Saladin whispered, but the tremor in his voice carried no mockery, only concern, only wonder, only war, distant, but drawing near. Chapter 31, The Purpose of the Book. The summer wind carried the scent of dust and drying herbs through the citadel's upper galleries. Ethan stood in the vaulted hall that overlooked the Temple Mount, his silver mask faintly catching the light. He had been waiting all morning, not pacing, but still, tense, coiled. At last, the hoofbeats echoed in the stone courtyard below. Cardinal Odo di Castellari had returned. By the time the cardinal was ushered into the king's receiving chamber, Ethan had composed himself. He sat with quiet dignity, a wool mantle draped over his shoulders, and Gerard beside him with a scribe's board and ink. Odo knelt briefly, then rose and withdrew a sealed scroll, bound in crimson ribbon, bearing the leaden seal of Pope Alexander III. The Holy Father sends his words, and his prayers, the cardinal said. Ethan broke the seal carefully, eyes scanning the Latin with trained speed, each word weighted with centuries of ecclesiastical etiquette. His eyes stilled halfway through. Then a breath, slow and long. He handed the scroll to Gerard, who read aloud for the others in the room. To Baldwin, King of Jerusalem, we have received a sacred book called Liber Throni Petri, the Book of Peter's Throne. Its beauty and clarity moved us and our brethren. The labor it represents, both spiritual and mechanical, is not lost upon us. Let it be known, the book remains in Rome, not as a curio, but as a tool for God's greater work. It will be studied, read aloud, and placed among those works deemed worthy for teaching and contemplation. The means of its making invite both admiration and caution. The Church must proceed wisely. But your aim, to spread the word to those who thirst for it, honors God and His throne. We await further signs of your labors in Christ's love and care. Alexander pp. Silence followed. Ethan looked up slowly. He'll use it. Cardinal Odo nodded, a smile just brushing his face. He has already convened a group of scholars. The monks at St. Paul's outside the walls were heard copying verses last week. The Liber stays in Rome, Ethan said, but its voice does not know, Odo agreed. It speaks. And you, my king, are not silenced. Later that evening, council chamber. The small council met by lamplight. Balian, Gerard, Anselm, and Odo de Saint Amand all leaned over the table's surface, where a copy of the Pope's letter lay beside a report on paper production quotas from the Kidron mill. He's cautious, Odo de Saint Amand said, voice low. But not hostile. He won't endorse us yet, Balian said, but he's let the door stay open. Then we make sure what comes next is undeniable, Ethan said, tapping the parchment. We keep the quality high. Psalms, Gospels, commentaries, pieces people recognize. We'll give priests and monks what they already know, just easier to hold. Easier to read. Printing presses are already working, Anselm said. The latest ink batch holds better than before. No more smudging after a day, and the paper, 2 reams a week now. Enough to print portions of the Gospels, especially Matthew and John, with ornate headings. Gerard gestured to the map of Jerusalem beside the table. Where do we send them? Start with the churches in Acre, Ethan said. Then to Antioch and the bishoprics in Cyprus. Quietly. No proclamations. Let the clergy pass them hand to hand, and when they ask where these came from, Balian asked, they'll say, Jerusalem, Ethan answered. Let that word carry weight again before dawn. The archives. Ethan walked alone in the cool hush of the archive chamber, lit by one oil lamp in the dim glow of first light. He passed shelves lined with parchment rolls, imported books, ledgers. He stopped before a newly added shelf. On it sat 2 copies of the Liber Throni Petri, bound in linen dyed with lapis and stitched with fine silk thread. They were copies of the ones sent to Rome, less embellished, but still beautiful. He touched the cover of one gently. You're doing your work now, he thought. Just in a different city than I planned. Behind him, footsteps. Gerard approached, cloak pulled tight around him. You're not disappointed, he asked. I am, Ethan said honestly. But I also see something more valuable. Gerard tilted his head. Permission, Ethan continued. Not to do whatever I want, but to keep going. They didn't close the door. They left it cracked open. Gerard nodded. So we slip through? No, Ethan said. We open it all the way. Slowly. Carefully. But we open it. Chapter 32, Spears in the Earth. The courtyard below the royal chambers echoed with a sound of clashing wood and shouted instruction. Ethan leaned on the carved stone balustrade, watching as a dozen young townsmen stumbled through a mock spear drill. Their movements were rugged, too loose, too eager, but the intent was there. He could work with intent. Balian stood beside him, arms folded. Not bad for bakers and cobblers. Better than nothing, Ethan replied. But not good enough to hold a line. When the Mamluks come thundering, Balian gave him a sidelong look. You're planning something? Ethan nodded. Monthly training. Every town and village within the kingdom's reach. Once every moon, the local levy gathers, not just to swing a sword, but to drill. Line work. Formation. Discipline. Balian raised an eyebrow. Militia like that will start to think they were soldiers. That's the idea, Ethan said. We'll never match Saladin's numbers or his cavalry. But if our common men can hold ground, if they can lock shields and drive spears, we'll make his charges bleed. Balian gave a low chuckle. That's what you were sketching last night? Those long spears, pikes, Ethan said. 14 feet, maybe 16. Ash shafts, iron tips. I'll have the smiths in Bethlehem begin forging prototypes this week. We'll start with 50 hard to carry. Slow to move, harder to break, Ethan countered. You plant them. You don't chase with them. They're for stopping what comes at you. The armory. 2 hours later, Ethan spread a charcoal sketch across the armory table. Anselm and the quartermaster peered at the unfamiliar design. The pike, its length dwarfing the short spears currently in use, was drawn in sections, wood grain etched with careful arrows indicating grain alignment, a spearhead shaped like a flattened leaf with a central ridge for durability. You'll need longer kills to harden the tips, Ethan noted, tapping the drawing. And tighter shafts. They need to flex, not snap. The quartermaster whistled low. They'll be hard to store. Bundle them upright. Wagon them to the field. Issue per 10 men. Anselm scratched at his chin. And the men, they'll need gloves. Leather wraps. Training in bracing and pivoting. I'll write down a 12-count drill pattern for starters. Get them used to moving together. He glanced toward the window where the city wall caught the golden edge of afternoon. We'll need officers who understand the flow. Not just nobles, militiamen promoted for reliability. Balian can help select them. Council chamber. That evening the council met in one of the smaller stone rooms, lanterns casting gentle light against polished olive wood. Balian stood by the fire, arms crossed, while Gerard, Odo de Saint-Amand, and Anselm sat around the central table with notes and ledgers before them. Let's talk militia, Ethan said, seating himself. Gerard raised an eyebrow. You want them to drill monthly, every moon. Each village. Jerusalem's force will serve as the model. 10 officers from the city's trained garrison will rotate out and oversee the countryside rounds. We'll give them stipends. Loyalty grows where duty is given value. Odo de Saint-Amand tapped the table. It will strain the budget. Food, lodging, oversight. We'll use trade surplus from Acre, Ethan said. Paper exports are up. The Italian merchants have started paying in silver again. Anselm nodded. And the Montgisard timber is coming down early. We can start on new storage barns for weapons. Then it's time to scale this, Ethan said, spreading another scroll. Starting with the first cohort in Bethlehem. They'll be issued the pike prototype by next month. Gerard leaned in. And what do we call this formation of yours? Ethan looked around the room and smiled faintly under the edge of his mask. The crown guard, he said. A wall of common men, with spears long enough to stop a charge. Let's see how Saladin handles that. 2 days later, workshop yard, east of the citadel. The yard bustled with saws, planers, and the hiss of iron in coal-fired forges. Ethan stood with Anselm and 2 of the lead blacksmiths beside the first finished pike prototype. It stood nearly 15 feet long, ashwood grains shining under beeswax polish, the iron head sharp and leaf-shaped, socketed deep and bound in bronze bands. It felt right in Ethan's hands, heavier than a javelin, but balanced. This is the future of our walls, he said. A group of 6 volunteers from the city stood nearby, each gripping a training pike, oak shafts without points, weighted to match. Ethan stepped before them and raised his voice feet wide. Shafts down. Brace low. On my count, forward line. They moved slowly, awkwardly, but with increasing confidence. 6 lines of men in 3 ranks extended the practice poles outward, forming a crude but serviceable wall of wood. Balian watched from the archway. We'll need twice this many by spring, he called out. If you want to hold the Jordan Valley. Ethan turned, smiling. Then we better start planting spears like seeds. That night, Ethan's writing table. The candle flickered low as Ethan wrote, his ink dark and steady. To the master of the forge at Acre, you are to begin crafting iron pike heads by the dozen. I am enclosing the pattern, with measurements exact. These are not javelins. These are to hold back horses. Send word when 50 are done. Baldwin, king of Jerusalem. He sealed the scroll and leaned back, arm sore, hand stained. Outside, the night wind whistled through the stone corridors, cool and clean. Pikes. Monthly drills. Militia that would march in rows, not mobs. It was slow work. But he could feel the shape of it, Jerusalem, not just surviving, but becoming something different. Rooted. Balanced. Ready. And if the armies of Saladin came again, they would not find the kingdom soft or scattered. They would find a wall of iron and wool, standing in their path. Chapter 33, The Shape of the Shield. The morning sun broke over Bethlehem with a slow burn, the hills to the east catching first light like watchfires kindling one after the next. Sir Martin of Ibelin, a broad-shouldered veteran with a crooked nose and a deep scar beneath one eye, stood at the edge of the field outside the village. He wore no helm, only a linen coif and a wool surcoat that bore the faded crest of his house. His chainmail was worn but mended, practical, like the man himself. He turned and surveyed the line forming behind him. 60 men. Not knights. Not even squires. Farmers, potters, thatchers, a few shepherds and 2 grizzled tanners. They'd been mustered 2 days ago by the local reeve under royal orders. Each man bore a training pike, ashwood shafts with leather-capped ends, weighted but blunt. Martin had trained footmen before. He'd broken up more tavern brawls than he could count and taught enough conscript levies to know what panic smelled like. But this was something new, not because the men were different, but because the orders were they had been instructed to train as a formation. Not as individuals. Train the line. Train the step. Train the voice. That was what the king's parchment had said, written in a firm and unadorned hand. Do not teach bravery. Teach repetition. Martin had read the letter twice before rolling it away. Now, on this dew-soaked morning, he turned to his sergeants. Form the block, he said. 3 ranks. Spear tips forward. Ready stance. The men shuffled. A few muttered. But they moved wood clacked as spear shafts scraped together. A dozen men at a time took their places, lining up shoulder to shoulder, the points of their ashwood poles all directed toward an imaginary enemy. Martin paced the front grip lower. He barked at a boy who still had cow dung on his boots. You'll never brace against a charge like that. He stopped before a man with a butcher's arms and a tremor in his elbow. Brace the shaft against your hip, not your ribs. Let your bones take the weight. He stepped back and surveyed them again. It was a poor wall, but it was a wall. He raised his voice. Do you think this is foolish? He said. Do you think a few sticks in the dirt can stop horses? Some laughed quietly. One man spat in the grass. Martin drew his sword, not to threaten, but to hold up before them like a standard. Then let me tell you what I saw at Montgisard. When the Saracens came down from the dunes like thunder. Hundreds of them. Our line bent. Our knights were scattered. But the men who held, who braced their spears and did not run, they made the enemy bleed. He lowered the sword. You don't need to be fast. You don't need to be strong. But you do need to stand where you're told, and stay there. The murmuring stopped. The men were listening now. Ready stance. He barked. The line adjusted. Martin turned and paced backward until he stood 20 yards away. Then he shouted again. Advance. 1 pace. The 60 men stepped forward as one, clumsily but in rhythm. Again, another step. Straighter this time. Now brace. All at once, the spears came down in unison. The first rank lowered theirs like a row of fences. The second raised theirs slightly over the shoulders of the first, to stab from behind. The third tilted upward, ready to plug gaps. Martin felt something in his chest tighten, not fear, not pride. Hope, perhaps. Noon break, campfire at the hill's edge. Sergeant Raoul, a square-jawed veteran from the coast, passed Martin a piece of hard bread and a cup of barley tea. They sat together under a low olive tree, the field still echoing with the clack of pikes being hauled to racks. They'll never match real soldiers, Raoul said, sipping. But they're learning. Martin nodded. We've drilled for 4 hours already and not a man's asked to leave. That counts for something. They believe the king's serious. That this isn't just parade stuff. He is serious, Martin said. He's spent coin. Had timber brought in from the hills. Issued custom pike heads to every smith between here and Jaffa. And the priests? Raoul asked. Martin gave a short laugh. Even the priests are beginning to talk about duty and order. They see this as something holy now. Defending the land, protecting the weak. It fits. Raoul swirled the last of his tea. And the cavalry, they'll still be our hammer, Martin said. But this. He nodded toward the racks of pikes. This will be our anvil. Late afternoon, personal journal of Sir Martin of Baldwin. Third day of training. Bethlehem. 60 men on the field. Drill improving. Had them hold a line against a charge, 5 knights at reduced pace. The line wavered, but held. One pole shattered. No one broke. Next week, rehearse wheel turns and pivot on command. King's next message expected by courier. Remarkable to see farmers begin to move like soldiers. Less bickering, more confidence. One boy from Hebron, Joseph, shows talent for leading others. Might suggest him to the captain for village training assignments. These are not heroes. But they may become defenders. Evening, at the chapel steps. The bell tower above Bethlehem's church was lit by the low sun as Martin met with a village reeve and local priest. Father Samuel. The king's orders are clear, Martin said. Monthly training will continue. Next gathering in 4 weeks. You'll post a list. The reeve nodded, brow furrowed. We'll have them ready. Father Samuel cleared his throat. Sir Martin, some ask whether it is sinful to train for war on sacred ground. Martin gave a respectful bow of his head. The king says defense of the kingdom is a holy act. That the Lord grants peace, but not passivity. Father Samuel rubbed his chin. Then let this be a peace built on discipline. Jerusalem. That same night far away, back in the royal city, Ethan read Martin's report by the light of oil lamps. He traced a finger over the parchment, noting each line of improvement, each mention of a name. Stepping forward. They're learning, he murmured. Balian, standing nearby, folded his arms. You're making soldiers of shepherds. No, Ethan said. I'm giving them something worth defending, and the tools to do it. He turned to his desk and began drafting new orders. Next, drills in Hebron and Nablus. Begin scaling up pike head production. And draw plans for a field manual, one that every sergeant could carry. Chapter 34, The Iron Hedge and the Thorn. The wind carried the tang of olive leaves and dust as Ethan stood on the training field east of Bethlehem, squinting toward the drilling militia. It was late afternoon, and the sunlight washed the fields in a pale gold. Dozens of local levymen, farmers, bakers, sons of craftsmen, moved in stiff formations, each one gripping a 12-foot pike. A small group of crossbowmen trailed them, their weapons half-cocked, learning to maneuver in tandem. This was the third week of testing what Ethan had called the Iron Hedge, a new formation built around discipline and coordinated ranks of pikemen and crossbowmen. If it worked, it would be the spine of Jerusalem's defense, unbreakable, repeatable, scalable. Balian of Ibelin, standing beside him in a boiled leather hauberk, shaded his eyes. They move like oxen still, he muttered. But they do move. That's more than most levies. They'll need time, Ethan replied. But I'd rather have 200 trained in this than 1,000 men running like frightened deer. When the cavalry charges, Balian folded his arms. Explain it again. The square I see, how do the bolts come into it? Ethan motioned to the field. The first 3 ranks, pikes. The 4th rank, also pikes, but lighter ones. Behind them, 2 loose lines of crossbowmen, with runners to reload and supply. The square holds the front. The bolts bleed the enemy before they reach it. Crossbows don't fire fast, Balian said. No, Ethan admitted. But if trained right, and supported properly, they don't need to. We fire in volleys. Not one at a time, but in rotating salvos. Half fire, half reload. The enemy never has a clean window. Balian nodded slowly. Like a smith's hammer, striking in rhythm. Ethan smiled. Exactly. And the pikes? They're not there to chase, they're a wall. Nothing gets through. They stood in silence for a moment as the field captain bellowed, brace. Kneel. Ready. Bolts, loose. A flurry of wooden limbs snapped forward. Bolts sailed low over the kneeling pikes and thunked into straw-stuffed dummies 40 paces ahead. Not all hit, but enough did. The pikes never moved. Their braced shafts formed a ring, like a hedgehog bristling with iron. It's working, Balian said. Quieter now. Slowly, Ethan said. But yes. It's working. Later that evening, council room, Jerusalem. Ethan spread open a new set of diagrams on the map table. Around him gathered his key military minds, Balian, Marshal Raymond de Gallard, Hugh of Montgisard, and the Templar Odo de Saint Amand. This formation, Ethan said, pointing to the labeled sketch, I call the pike and shot, though we'll use bolts, not shot. The idea is simple, a mobile, defendable block of infantry that can repel cavalry and strike back with ranged fire. Raymond studied the sketch. And these crossbowmen, are they inside the square, behind and along the edges? Ethan replied. Protected. When the enemy approaches, they fire into the gaps between formations. We rotate them like a loom. Odo tapped the page. You're describing precision from peasants. I'm describing what can be trained, Ethan said calmly. Not overnight. But in months. A dozen such formations could block a battlefield. And if they were flanked? Raymond asked. Cavalry support on the wings, Balian answered. We'll pair each square with a maneuver element, light horse, to harass and distract, or even slingers, Hugh offered, for when bolts are spent. Ethan nodded. Exactly. Nothing in this kingdom is wasted. Every peasant, every stone, every field. We don't outnumber the Ayyubids. But we can outthink them. A silence followed. The candlelight flickered over the maps. And what of mobility? Odo asked. A square does not march quickly. We train for that, Ethan said. 2 formations. Marching column for travel. Combat square for engagement. Drill it until it's instinct. Balian smiled slightly. The men are learning. Faster than I thought. They're hungry, Ethan said. Not just for food, but for purpose. Give a man a field, he'll till it. Give him a place in the line, he'll hold it next morning. Field test. The Bethlehem contingent stood ready, 80 men in 2 squares, flanked by a dozen crossbowmen in rear support. Their new command system was in place, color-coded flags and sharp single-word calls. Ethan watched from a low hill as Captain Osric, a Frank with a booming voice and hawk-like focus, ran the drill march. The squares moved, not perfectly, but steadily. Dust rose and organized lines halt. Formed combat, the spears bristled. Crossbows knelt volley, the air snapped with a crack of limbs, and a wave of bolts hissed toward the line of practice shields. Dust plumed from impact. Reload. Second line, fire. The cycle continued. From the slope, Ethan could see the rhythm beginning to settle, steady, deliberate, almost serene. Balian, seated beside him on horseback, gave a slow nod. They're not soldiers yet. But they could be. Ethan didn't take his eyes from the field. They'll need to be that evening. Notes and strategy. Back in his chambers, Ethan wrote by lamplight. Day 97 since the first pike prototype. Drills proceeding. Bethlehem militia forming coherent blocks. Average reload time for crossbowmen. 14 seconds. Goal. 10. Morale holding. Captain Osric, a natural instructor, will transfer to Nablus next month. Objective: 10 formations across the kingdom before year's end. Problem: bolts. Will need local fletchers and blacksmiths producing thousands. Rationed carefully. Rotate squads to preserve stores. He paused, dipped the quill again. The pike and bolt doctrine will define the kingdom's spine. We cannot win with steel alone. But with time, unity, and rhythm, we can shape an army no sultan will crush outside. The night winds carried the sound of distant drilling, the repetition of men learning the feel of long pikes, the creak of crossbow strings, the rhythm of a kingdom reshaping itself. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 35, Roots in Stone, Rhythm in Steel. The morning haze clung to Jerusalem's streets like wool, but the city stirred early now. Market stalls were opening before sunrise, construction crews were at work by the first bell, and carts loaded with linen rags, timber, and quarried stone rumbled across the cobbled roads before most noblemen had broken their fasts. King Baldwin IV, Ethan, watched it all unfold from the east tower of the citadel. From here, the veins of his ambition stretched outward. Not yet complete, but real. Alive, he turned as Anselm, his steward, entered, clutching a bound ledger and bearing the dust of early rounds. We've results from Acre, sire, Anselm said, bowing. The lime furnaces are consistent now. We can supply your pulp vats for the next 2 months. Ethan took the ledger and flipped through the neat columns: pulp weight, yield ratios, drying times. All progressing. Slowly, methodically. But progressing good, he said. Any trouble with the new filters? Anselm shook his head. The reed mesh design you suggested holds. We're making paper twice as strong and with fewer splits. They walked down the stone stairs together, descending into the heart of the citadel as Anselm continued his updates. The print team has finished their second full month of work. They've mastered block alignment and ink spreading. Master Tommaso reports that 4 pages can be printed per hour now, reliably. We've moved from Psalms to the Sermon on the Mount. Ethan nodded slowly. Still hand-pressed, for now, yes, Anselm said. The screw press prototype is being reworked. Too much torque. One cracked the wooden plate last week. The Templar carpenter is reinforcing it with iron bands this week. Ethan made a mental note to review the design sketches again, maybe reinforce the lower pressure plate with a layered lattice of hardwood. This world was always reminding him that shortcuts didn't last. They passed beneath an arch into the citadel's inner court, where the stone for the bathhouse was being laid by a crew of 30 masons and haulers. The heated floors had proven more complex than anticipated. The Roman-style hypocaust channels required too perfect leveling to allow the smoke to circulate. They had resorted to chiseled brick supports with flue gaps and were now testing the first section with live coals. Progress? Ethan asked as he knelt by one of the bricks. Slow but sure, answered Gerard, the hospitaller surgeon, who had taken a strange interest in the structure. The heat is uneven, but it rises. We'll have to build in more vents. These coals need to breathe. Everything does, Ethan muttered. Paper mill, Kidron Valley. 3 days later, Ethan rode out with Balian to inspect the paper mill near the Kidron Valley. The building, constructed from a mix of Mont Gizzard pine and Jerusalem limestone, stood low against the stream, its wide wheel turning lazily in the current. The rhythmic clunk of iron hammers inside was now a steady feature of the valley. They were producing 10 sheets a day, rag pulp soaked in lime and lye, beaten to slurry, and lifted into mesh screens by hand. Drying took 2 days, pressing another, trimming a fourth. Not yet scalable, but the process was replicable inside. Ethan examined a sample. It was still slightly warped, but sturdy. The watermark design, an ornate cross and a stylized dove, came through faintly. Still smells of linen, Balian said, wrinkling his nose. It'll pass, Ethan replied. Everything new carries a smell. They watched a young apprentice strip pulping vat with a wooden oar. Could this be done in Acre? Balian asked. Ethan nodded. Eventually. I want 2 mills by year's end. One here. One north. Then a third in Jaffa. Local paper lowers cost, speeds production. Balian crossed his arms. If you live long enough to see it done. Ethan offered a faint smile beneath his silver mask. Then I better keep writing. Militia training ground, Jaffa Road encampment. Back in Jerusalem, Ethan spent 3 afternoons observing the militia's weekly drills. The Bethlehem cohort was now joined by men from Hebron and Ramlah, nearly 160 total. They'd begun rotating between training locations, each man committing 1 week per month. The drill field resembled a carpenter's drawing board, flag-marked grids, labeled lanes, supply posts, and archery pits. Overseen by Captain Osric, the formations had begun to move with something like unity. Each square now contained 32 pikemen in 4 ranks of 8, with 8 crossbowmen in the rear, rotating in volleys. Flank runners were assigned to carry spare bolts, water, and retrieve dummies for reuse. Ethan watched from horseback as Osric bellowed, "Form square. Kneel second rank. Brace, brace. Volley 1, ready. Loose." The creak and snap of crossbows followed. The bolts struck the line of wooden posts 20 paces out with sharp, cracking thuds. Volley 2, loose. The second line fired. Reloading runners knelt between formations, swapping strings and bolts with practiced ease. It wasn't perfect. Some men fumbled reloading, a few pikes wavered when the signal was unclear. But it worked. There was shape to it now. Not chaos. System. After the drill, Ethan walked among them, offering nods and brief praise. When a young pike wielder from Hebron asked if they'd march against the Turks next, Ethan paused. "No," he said. "You're not a sword to be thrown. You're the wall behind which the kingdom stands. You'll hold, and the world will break on you." They stared in silence. But several straightened. One even grinned. Jerusalem, Treasury Hall. 1 week later Anselm returned with the news from Acre. The vault stone was now fully laid. The fortified Templar structure would serve as the first true financial node for the kingdom. Gold and promissory storage had begun in small volumes, wealth deposited for safety, tracked in double-entry ledgers. Receipts issued? Ethan asked. "Yes, sire. Templars issue paper notices signed and sealed, redeemable in Acre or Jerusalem." Ethan smiled. "Begin training scribes for branch systems. 1 ledger per location. Always duplicate it." Tap the desk. "This is how it begins, Anselm. With records." "Order." "Trust." Anselm nodded. "And what of schools?" "Still waiting," Ethan said. "1 flame at a time near the city walls, cavalry stables elsewhere." His new breed of light cavalry, armored with boiled leather and trained in loose formation, was developing. Not knights, but fast, responsive. They practiced feigned retreats, skirmishing, flanking charges. Horse archers were still years away. But mounted crossbowmen? That was closer. A young knight named Everett of Bethany approached with a rough saddle design that allowed for better crossbow bracing. "Test it," Ethan said. "If it works, we outfit 20 evening." The Leper King's journal. That night, Ethan wrote, "The men are changing. Slowly. But not as slowly as I feared. Bethlehem Square can hold formation against charge simulations. Jaffa team learning volley rotation. Crossbow production remains the bottleneck. Bathhouse stones hold heat. Vault system in Acre stabilizing. Paper mill reliable. Printing ongoing. A kingdom built on dust, mortar, rhythm, and routine. Not glory. I wonder if that's how Rome began." He dipped the quill again. "The mold no longer spreads. Girard calls it God's favor. I call it chance. Or perhaps mercy. We need more time, and time, like everything else, must be earned." He looked out over Jerusalem, no longer the fading jewel of Christendom, but the heart of something new. Slower than he'd wished, but stronger than he'd dared to hope. Chapter 36, The Tongues of Kings. The air in the royal chamber was crisp with morning wind filtering through the stone latticework. Though the summer sun had risen, Jerusalem's high citadel remained cool in the early hours. King Baldwin IV, Ethan, cloaked in silver and discipline, stood before a table layered in fresh maps, letters, and tokens of far-off courts. The room held a silence rarely felt in court, not fear, but focus. Balian of Ibelin stood near the window, arms crossed, watching the pigeons wheel above the Temple Mount. Gérard de Redefort stood beside the heavy wooden chair meant for the king, leaning lightly on the pommel of his sword. Across from them were 2 new arrivals, envoys from the courts of Antioch and Armenia, modest in dress, deliberate in posture, their curiosity barely hidden behind diplomatic restraint. "Speak," Ethan said simply. "You've ridden long to be here." The older of the 2, Serap of Cis, envoy of the Armenian kingdom of Cilicia, bowed with stiffness earned by decades in the saddle. "Your Majesty, my Lord Prince Leo sends concern and curiosity. We hear much, of machines and mills, of your rejection of gold for parchment, and of purges within your own court." Ethan nodded once. "If you're here to ask after Raymond of Tripoli, know this, he betrayed Jerusalem. Not just me, but the very future of this kingdom. He conspired with Saladin in secret councils, fed him the timings of our troop movements during Gaza's campaign. And for that, He met justice. There was no dramatic flourish. Just finality. Thomas of Antioch cleared his throat. Antioch does not mourn Raymond. Nor does it condemn his removal. But his death has shaken the Latin nobility. Many fear that the old foundations are crumbling too quickly. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly behind the slits of his mask. They should fear, he said softly. But not for their thrones. For their complacency. He turned away from the envoys briefly and gestured to the open scrolls on the central table, documents outlining militia musters, grain storage tallies, irrigation channels in Jaffa, and the defensive progress of Jerusalem's outer ring of strongholds. I don't rule for legacy, he said. I rule to endure. What I do, schools, presses, pikes, roads, is to give this kingdom a spine, so it can stand when Saladin returns. SYNOPSIS inclined his head. Then allow us to see it. Let us send clerics and commanders to Acre. Let them judge for themselves. Ethan turned back to face them. I will allow it. Not for approval, but for transparency. This kingdom is no longer a black box of intrigue. Those days died with Raymond. Later that day, Strategic Council Balian leaned over a newly inked copy of the Holy Land, each stronghold and pass now pinned with tokens of garrison strength. The red markers around the Galilee region showed improvements. Giblet had begun using new windmill gears, and Belvoir had just received its second shipment of pike heads. Ethan sat with one leg crossed over the other, flanked by Gerard and his silent scribe. The letter to Prince Leo is ready, Balian said. It extends a tour invitation, confirms trade protection, and carefully avoids any mention of Raymond. Good, Ethan said. Send it by courier immediately. Include 3 printed psalms and a papyrus map of the new grain canal outside Jaffa. What about Edessa? Gerard asked. Their bishopric has remained quiet since Raymond's death. They're watching. But silence is not disapproval. Ethan looked to Balian. Send a report to Heraclius in Tyre. Ask him to forward a letter to the Edessan bishop. Frame it in ecclesiastical terms, about renewal and Christian stewardship and the Genoese. Balian asked. Keep the invitation open. But be cautious. They follow trade more than faith. Give them incentives, not ideals. Midweek, training field. Outside Jerusalem, the sun bore down on a field churning with dust and steel. 100 militiamen, farmers, masons, carpenters, stood in formation, pikes held vertically, crossbows slung across their backs. At intervals, barked commands from 2 sergeants cut through the heat. The men practiced forming tight squares, using padded drills to simulate cavalry charges. Ethan, astride a short Anatolian horse, observed from behind a canvas shade alongside Gerard and Captain Arnaud, one of Balian's field leaders. They were learning, Arnaud said, wiping sweat from his brow. The drills are exhausting them, but they hold position now. Even under mock strikes they'll need more than discipline, Gerard said. Pikes are fine against cavalry, but we need flanks protected and reserves trained to fill gaps. Ethan nodded. I've been thinking of a 4-layer formation, pike front, crossbow behind, light melee on the wings, and a final row of reserves to rotate in. Field tested by next month. And I want runners trained to carry orders down the line during combat. Arnaud raised an eyebrow. Like messengers during a siege, like battlefield couriers. Fast, trained, and given coded signals. Most armies collapse because they can't adapt mid-battle. We will. 3 days later, letters and counsel. In his study, Ethan penned the final draft of a royal decree, this one directed not at lords, but at the clergy of the realm. Let every abbey and cathedral under the protection of the Latin kingdom send a scholar or clerk to Jerusalem within the season. Not to debate, but to observe. The Liber Throni Petri shall be their guide. The Pope has accepted the book. Let Rome's bishops see that we carry out its ideals not in rebellion, but in faith. Balian, reading over the shoulder, said, You're building a web of quiet trust. Ethan looked up. I'm building a world in which betrayal like Raymond's can't survive. Not in shadows. Not in whispers. Chapter 37, Foundations in the Flesh. The wind that swept through the Damascus gate that morning carried not only dust from the road, but voices from dozens of tongues, Italian, Greek, Occitan, Armenian, and even Low German. The Great Gate of Jerusalem, usually a passage of merchants and pilgrims, had become something else entirely, the entryway to a new kind of kingdom. They came on foot and horseback, with wagons creaking under the weight of tools, seed grain, and crates of books. Whole families, guild artisans, former soldiers, and widowed nuns seeking a fresh start in the East. They were not pilgrims chasing relics nor nobles hoping for land. They were settlers, drawn by rumors of a king building a new Jerusalem with ink and iron from the parapets above. Baldwin IV, Ethan, watched the long procession with narrowed eyes. His silver mask caught a morning sun as he turned toward Balian of Ibelin. Beside him they were earlier than expected. Ethan murmured. The Genoese ship docked 2 days ahead of schedule. Balian replied. Another 2 caravans are expected by week's end, one from the Balkans, and another from Provence. Some even claim they came after reading about your College of Trades idea in Acre, though you've yet to even announce it. Ethan didn't smile, but the corner of his mouth moved. Ideas move faster than horses. Sometimes below, guards opened the inner gate and began directing the settlers toward temporary quarters outside the city walls, a canvas camp reinforced with timber and stone. Flags bearing the Jerusalem cross snapped in the breeze above each tent cluster. Do they know what they were in for? Balian asked quietly. They know enough. That they will work. That they will be given land only if they learn our crops. That they are not serfs, but stewards. Later that day, the hall of assembly, the high chamber inside the citadel, had never been so full of color. The marble floor gleamed with sunlight refracted through the stained glass newly installed along the upper gallery. Around the table sat envoys and ranking officers, while in the upper tiers stood the most prominent new arrivals, a Genoese master stonemason, a German cartwright, an Armenian abbot, 2 Greek midwives, and a French surgeon whose eyes carried both fatigue and curiosity. They had been invited not merely as honored guests, but as symbols. Ethan stood at the head of the table, masked and robed, with Gerard de Ridefort and Balian at either side. He addressed them not as a king to subjects, but as one steward to another. You come not to serve, he said in Latin, but to build. And in this, we must be of one purpose. He turned toward a great parchment map pinned across the back wall, a topographic chart of the Holy Land, freshly copied from one of the printing presses. The lands east of Ramla and south of Acre are fertile but underused. The canals near Jaffa, built last winter, now feed those fields. You will be sent there. But you will not be sent alone. He gestured to one of his advisors, who stepped forward with a scroll of names. Each settlement will be paired with an experienced local family, chosen from villages that already follow our crop rotation trials. You will learn what works. You will keep what you grow. But your work will feed this kingdom, its soldiers, its schools, its people. The Genoese stonemason rose. And if Saladin returns, Balian answered, you won't just grow wheat. You will raise walls. Your workshops will arm our levies. The kingdom has begun new watchtowers along the southern passes. Settlements will double as fortified hamlets. Not castles, but bastions. You are not defenseless. Ethan turned toward a waiting scribe. Read it, he said. The scribe opened a missive bearing the papal seal, the response to the Liber Throni Petri. Let it be known that the Holy Father receives this work not as rebellion but renewal. Let its example illuminate the frontier. Let Jerusalem remain a lamp to all Christendom. It was not a formal endorsement of Ethan's reforms, but it was permission. And permission was enough. Evening, planning council. Later that night, the citadel's planning hall flickered with lamplight and the quiet rustling of scrolls. Ethan, seated with Balian, Gerard, and 2 new advisors, Sister Marie, the Provençal midwife, and Brother Leontius, a Greek deacon with knowledge of architecture, reviewed the next phase of settler placement. There are now 53 adult settlers, Balian said, plus 14 children and 8 hired guards among them. More will come in weeks. They'll need homes before winter, Sister Marie noted, tracing a square on the map. These northern slopes, here, near Cana, are temperate. We can build longhouse-style dormitories while families establish their own plots. Leontius tapped another spot on the map, just east of Nablus. If we pair every village with a priest or monk, we can ensure literacy. Even if we don't yet have schools. Ethan nodded. Good. But don't impose. Literacy is a bridge, not a yoke. And make sure they understand why it matters, not just to read scripture, but to read farming manuals, building codes, medical leaflets. Let each press in Acre prepare 50 booklets on planting cycles. Gerard leaned forward. We should prepare armed patrols to follow the settlers for their first 2 months. The roads between Ramla and Ascalon are not yet secure, and so we will, Ethan agreed. Assign them under a local banner, not Jerusalem's, but their own. Let the settlers feel ownership of their defense outside the citadel. Nightfall in the canvas camp, firelight crackled across cook fires and story circles. Some played lutes and tambourines, others sat in quiet prayer. Children ran between carts and half-built fences. A sense of motion, of life, pervaded the scene from the city wall. Ethan watched them in silence, the wind tugging at his cloak. Gerard joined him after a moment. Arms crossed. This may work, Gerard said, almost in disbelief. Ethan replied, it has to. Behind him, the future was unfolding, in steel and ink, in foreign tongues and planted seeds, but this night was theirs, and the kingdom of Jerusalem, no longer only a city, but an idea, breathed a little deeper. Chapter 38, The Weight of Uncertainty. The jasmine-scented breeze carried through the shaded arches of the Damascus citadel, stirring the green and gold banners that hung above Saladin's private audience chamber. Morning light filtered through latticework windows, drawing shifting patterns on the mosaic floor. Beneath one such shifting net of light sat the Sultan himself, Saladin Yusuf ibn Ayub. Calm, silent, contemplative. Across from him, kneeling on a prayer rug, was a courier freshly returned from Palestine. His burnous was travel-stained, his beard still dusty from the road. You saw them with your own eyes? Saladin's voice was soft, but it stilled the room. Yes, my Sultan. I entered Galilee with 2 others, posing as Syrian spice merchants. We reached Acre, then Tyre. I remained for 5 days among the markets. What I saw, what we all saw, was not what we expected. Saladin nodded, inviting the man to go on. They are building. Not merely walls, but settlements. Organized ones. Surveyed ground. Structures laid in straight lines. Villages with wells and granaries, some even paved roads. New families arrive from the sea weekly, Franks, yes, but also Greeks, Lombards, even men from beyond the Danube. A long silence followed. Saladin's generals and ministers exchanged wary glances. Al-Adil, his brother, broke the silence. They plant roots. Not trades. Roots. Saladin closed his eyes for a moment, his hands clasped before him and their king. He asked, "What did you see?" "The Leper King still lives," the courier said. "He wears a silver mask and rarely shows his face, but the people speak of him as if he were touched by heaven. He rides still, even walks at times. Some say he cannot die." Several murmurs echoed through the room. A younger emir crossed himself and whispered, "Astaghfirullah." Saladin opened his eyes. "He is dying. That much is certain. But his will has not weakened." "He is not Baldwin," Al-Adil said softly. "Not the boy you faced at Montchesard." Saladin nodded once, slowly. "No," he said. "He is something else." That evening, the war council. The Sultan sat beneath a cedar wood ceiling painted with stars in Quranic calligraphy. Before him was a long map table covered in brass weights and painted flags, the map itself a stitched canvas marked with hill forts, roads, rivers. Beside him stood his trusted captains, Al-Adil, Emir hwachas, Muzaffar al-Din Gukbari, and the scholar Qadi al-Khatib, his closest intellectual confidant. "What do we know of these weapons?" Saladin asked without preamble. Hwachas replied, voice measured. "There are new engines. Larger trebuchets. Our agents say they hurl heavier stones with greater force than anything used in Egypt or Syria. They are stationed at key passes, especially near Gaza and the coast, and their soldiers," al-Khatib answered. "This time, a militia has been raised. Trained monthly. They fight in formation, pike squares, reinforced by crossbowmen. It is a slow evolution, but it shows planning, intent and purpose." Adi Gukbari. Saladin exhaled slowly, his fingers tracing a river on the map. "He is digging in for the long war. Not to strike, but to endure. To shift the center of his kingdom from Crusader to colonist." Al-Adil leaned over the map. "We can't wait 10 years for this kingdom to become a citadel. If we mean to take it." "No," Saladin interrupted, calm but firm. "We do not strike blindly. That is what they expect. That is what the old kings of Damascus would have done. We are not them." He looked up, eyes steady. "If this king of Jerusalem is planting a garden, then we must grow a forest beside him elsewhere." Letters in motion. In the days that followed, Saladin dictated letters to Cairo, Mosul, and Aleppo, ordering scholars to gather every account of Greek and Roman military theory, siegecraft, and civil planning. He summoned engineers to Damascus, Muslim, Jewish, and Christian artisans alike, commanding a quiet competition of ideas: better irrigation for the upper Orontes, expanded granaries along the Horn Plain, reinforcement of frontier fortresses. Even as he planned for war, he turned an eye toward statecraft. "We must not merely oppose him," he told Al-Adil in private. "We must answer him." The garden at night. Saladin often walked his private garden after midnight, past fig trees and rose vines heavy with dew. He favored solitude then, not for prayer, though he always whispered the evening dhikr, but for strategy. The rumors from Jerusalem still lingered. A press that stamped books in days, not months. A canal dug near Jaffa using a curious wooden scoop arm. Soap made in quantities larger than any monastery's vats. Not weapons. Not walls, but tools of endurance. And behind it all, a dying king who spoke of banks, of education, of city cleanliness. A madman. Or a prophet, or a man with just enough time left to do the impossible. Final scene. Quiet orders in the darkness before dawn. Saladin met once more with his most trusted courier. You will go south. Not to Jerusalem, but to Acre and Jaffa. Pose as a trader. I want you to learn everything, not about their knights, but about their streets. Their paper. Their laborers. Count their ships. Their farmers. The prices in their markets. He handed the man a thin ring. This will buy you silence when gold fails. Do not return until you know how many bricks are being laid in a week. The man bowed deeply. Saladin stood at the window, watching the stars fade behind the line of the anti-Lebanon mountains. Baldwin built a kingdom to conquer, he whispered. This one builds to survive. He turned from the window. We must prepare for both. Chapter 39, The Lion's Path. The August wind moved restlessly across the highlands of Galilee, lifting dust from the limestone ridges and rustling the olive groves that dotted the hills. The sun burned low in the western sky, gilding the land in fire-colored light, while the heat of the day clung to the stones beneath Ethan's feet. He stood on a stony rise northeast of Acre, overlooking a distant bend in the Jordan River. To any other man, it was just a scrubby, uneven stretch of land divided by the winding thread of water and guarded by narrow hills. But to Ethan, now King Baldwin IV, it was a hinge upon which the fate of his kingdom might turn. Jacob's Ford. I don't like the look of those slopes, muttered Balian, shading his eyes. They give an enemy a fine perch to rain fire down on us. But if we take them first, he trailed off. He didn't need to say it aloud. Ethan nodded slowly. It's a bottleneck. A necessary crossing for any army pushing westward from Damascus. There are other ways through the region, but none so reliable year-round. If we hold this place, we can stall any advance, or draw it toward us. To his right stood Otto of St. Emond, Grand Master of the Templars. The man had a soldier's bearing, his arms folded across his chest beneath the stark white cloak marked with the red cross of his order. His face was granite, unreadable, his expression sharpened by a blend of suspicion and tactical interest. A bold claim, Otto said at last. Fortifying that ford would invite war. It is too close to Saladin's heartland. Too provocative. That's precisely why we must do it, Ethan replied. Every time we let him dictate the battlefield, we lose ground, or time. But here, we can choose both. Otto's brow furrowed. You obeyed him? With a castle, I would offer him a price so tempting he cannot refuse it. But one that will cost him dearly. Back in Jerusalem, the strategy room. By the time they returned to the city, a dry wind was carrying the first hint of autumn through the narrow streets. Inside the stone keep of Jerusalem, Ethan had his scribes unroll a fresh map of the northern kingdom. Candlelight flickered over parchment covered in careful ink strokes, rivers, roads, topography, and marked positions of known fortresses. Ethan circled Jacob's Ford with a piece of charcoal. Here. It lies directly between Caesarea Philippi and Banias. It sits near enough to Tiberias that we could reinforce it in under a week, and close enough to Damascus that Saladin cannot ignore it. Balian leaned over the table, tapping the area with a calloused finger. If we build, we must build fast. The fort is exposed on all sides. We'll need a fortress with inner and outer walls. Strong curtain defenses. A dry moat and reinforced gatehouses. It should be built with defense in mind first, comfort second. And how do we pay for it? Asked Otto, ever the realist. Ethan gestured to the scrolls stacked beside him. Donations from the Italian communes, gifts from sympathetic lords, and contributions from the incoming settlers. I'll offer land grants around the fortress to those who help raise it. Balian raised an eyebrow. You mean to plant a village there, in time? Yes. A permanent community of loyal families. With a fortress to guard them, fields to feed them, and roads connecting them to Tiberias and Acre. If Saladin destroys it, he'll destroy a Christian colony, not just a castle. The symbolism matters. Otto was silent a long moment. Then he said, the order will send stoneworkers and guards. But will not be drawn into an overreach. This fortress must hold. It will, Ethan said quietly. Because we'll build it as though it must. Designing the fortress for the next 2 weeks, Ethan shut himself away in a chamber converted into a planning workshop. Tables were covered in scrolls, sketches, and stone samples. Engineers, masons, and scribes came and went like bees to a hive. Every morning began with a reading of the latest terrain surveys from the Jordan Valley. Every evening ended with another sketch, another refinement. He envisioned a concentric castle, something the current age barely understood. A central keep surrounded by multiple layers of curtain walls, each higher than the last, with flanking towers to cover every blind spot. Ethan had the walls angled to deflect siege projectiles, and planned for internal stairs that allowed rapid movement between levels instead of thin parapets. The walls would be walkable, with recesses for our blisters. Beneath the keep would be underground storage chambers, dry food, grain, tools, and arms. Fresh water was crucial. Ethan ordered that the builders locate a spring, or failing that, dig a cistern connected to rainwater channels from the fortress roofs. Every detail mattered. From where the stables would be placed, near the inner wall, but not within the central keep, to the shape of the battlements, he opted for rounded merlons to better deflect arrows. A guard tower on the east would have a fire beacon, visible from both Tiberias and Safe. The centerpiece was the northern gatehouse. Built not merely as a door, but as a killing zone, with a drop-floor murder hole chamber, portcullis, and internal traps. Ethan's innovations made it a fortress designed to bleed an attacker slowly and break sieges with time and attrition. Construction begins by mid-September. Caravans rolled out of Acre with the first shipments of timber, lime, and quarried stone. A Templar column escorted them, footmen, mounted knights, and baggage carts packed with tools. Camps were erected near the river's edge, initially just canvas tents, then palisades, and by October, wooden scaffolding stretched over the rocky hills where the foundations were being dug. Ethan sent an order that no building stone be reused from ancient ruins. "Let this castle rise new," he said. "Let it be born of our generation, not borrowed from the bones of Rome." Hundreds labored, Frankish masons, Genoese engineers, Armenian carpenters, and local converts seeking royal favor. Women tended fires and fetched water. Children brought nails and pegs from carts. The ringing of hammers echoed through the valley from dawn to dusk. Work was slow at first. The terrain was unkind, sloped, uneven, and plagued with summer rock slides. But Ethan had anticipated this. He divided the work crews into rotating shifts and instructed them in more efficient pulley systems based on what he called compound rigging. His innovations baffled the local engineers, but they could not argue with the results. Blocks rose faster, scaffolding held stronger, and fewer backs gave out from hauling twice a week. Balian visited the site and sent back detailed reports. Once, he returned with a small bundle of dried flowers and a note written in a dialect of Arabic found near the northern hill. He explained, laying it on the table. "Scouts believe Saladin's eyes are already watching." Ethan studied the note without speaking. "They'll come," he said at last. "When they're ready." Council of War in early October. Ethan gathered his advisors in Jerusalem once more. The war table was now crowded with updated maps, parchment elevation plans, and ink diagrams of the Jacob's Ford project. Balian leaned over a model of the curtain wall. "The outer wall is nearly waist high now. They expect it to reach full height before winter." "What of arms?" asked Odo. "We must begin stockpiling. If Saladin tests it before it is finished." Ethan nodded. "I've already instructed Tyre and Beirut to begin rotating crossbow shipments to the site. We'll arm the initial garrison with both crossbows and pikes. Not light militia pikes, but 10 to 12 footers. Square formations. Braced to receive cavalry and infantry." "Wall," Odo said, clearly impressed. "Good. Even Saladin's Mamluks won't charge into a forest of iron. We'll also mount fixed artillery once the tower is complete," Ethan added. "Counterweight trebuchets. 2 on the east, 1 west-facing stone throwers, yes. Range of over 300 meters, with specialized troughs for quick reloading. They'll be buried into the platform for extra protection." "Ambitious," Balian said, smiling faintly. "Let's hope Saladin gives us the time to finish it." Ethan looked around the table, eyes narrowing behind the silver mask. "Then let's not give him the time to act first." Signs and portents. By late October, smoke rose daily from the fortress site, signals of construction fires and night watch beacons. Patrols along the Jordan increased. Some reported distant riders, others found tracks near the escarpments. One patrol intercepted a merchant caravan from the Horan. Its driver, a grizzled Syrian Christian, whispered that Damascus itself stirred with the rumor. "They say the French king is building a fortress like none seen before. That he means to use it not just to defend, but to strike. Some fear you'll move on Basra or even Damascus if they don't act." Ethan received the report in silence. Then he dismissed his court and went to his balcony alone, standing in the amber light of late afternoon, watching the sun fall toward the hills beyond the Jordan. He did not smile. But neither did he frown. Chapter 40, Whispers Along the Jordan. August 1178. Damascus. The dry wind from the anti-Lebanon mountains hissed through the latticed windows of the Qasr al-Azm in Damascus. It carried with it the faint scent of dust, iron, and pine, a whisper from the frontier inside the palace's receiving hall, lit by hanging brass lanterns and the filtered glow of the courtyard beyond. Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, Saladin, Sat in silence. A map lay spread before him. Not parchment or scroll, but a stitched and painted linen depiction of the Levant, commissioned by his court artisans the previous spring. Black ink marked the ridge lines of the Golan, red strokes traced the roads to Jerusalem and Acre. Along the Jordan River, near the confluence of minor tributaries and the northern fords, a circle had been added only days ago in blue-dyed Jacob's Ford. A quiet breath stirred beside him. His half-brother Al-Adil stood nearby, arms folded in his sleeves, watching Saladin's face for signs of anger, or worse, resolve. The messenger who had brought the news still knelt, sweating despite the coolness of the marble floor. A stone fortification? Saladin asked at last, his voice low. Even yes, Sultan. Not a watchtower or palisade. They dig deep, quarrying stone from Galilee, hauling timber from the west. My men counted over 300 laborers under guard. Christian knights patrol the ridges. It is no feint in their banner? Saladin asked without looking up. Jerusalem's lion and cross, the scout replied. But also, a silver standard. A new one. We believe it is the Leper King's personal emblem. Saladin frowned. He had not underestimated Baldwin IV, even before the rumors of strange speech, foreign ideas, and unsettling health. But this was not the cautious boy king of earlier campaigns. This was different. A fortress at Jacob's Ford was no small gesture. It was a challenge. He looked at Al-Adil. What do you make of it? Al-Adil exhaled slowly. It threatens Damascus more than it defends Jerusalem. It will strangle our access to Galilee and allow for raids into Haran. They wish to provoke us, perhaps draw us into siege. Then it is working, said Taqi Adlin, another of Saladin's nephews, stepping forward from the chamber's edge. We should send a warning force, fast cavalry, to burn their supplies and scatter the workers before it becomes a wall we cannot breach. They would expect that, Al-Adil warned. You forget Gaza. The Franks no longer blunder blindly. They bait their hooks carefully now. Saladin said nothing for a moment. His gaze drifted back to the map. He had passed through Jacob's Ford once, years ago, when he had served under Nur Adlin, marching north to punish rebellious tribes. Even then it had seemed an obvious choke point, a place where nature herself funneled men and war. Now it would be more. The Council of Damascus. That evening, the Majlis gathered beneath the mosaic dome of the palace's inner hall. The tension was thick. Viziers, military commanders, religious scholars, and Syrian emirs filled the long cushions that ringed the room. Brass trays of dates and honey remained untouched. Saladin sat at the head, silent as the scribes lit their inkwells and settled to record. The Franks are fortifying Jacob's Ford, Saladin began. A month's ride from here. Their labor continues under armed watch. Scouts report stone walls and siege engines under construction. Murmurs rose. They mean to threaten Damascus, cried one emir from Homs. They will draw your army west, weaken your grasp on Egypt. Added another. Perhaps this is a bluff, offered a scribe. A show to unsettle our court. No, Saladin said sharply. This is real. The Franks are building a dagger. And unless we move soon, it will sit at our throat. The room quieted. It was the older Qadi, the chief judge of Damascus, who finally spoke with careful calm. Then what is your course, Sultan? Saladin's gaze swept the room. I will not commit my main army yet. We must know more. Who finances this? What allies support it? What is their intent, provocation or preparation for campaign? He looked to Al-Adil. You will ride east. Speak with our agents among the Bedouin, the Armenian traders near Tyre, the Copts in Acre. I want names and cargo manifests. I want to know who builds this fortress and what gold funds it. He turned to Taqi ad-Din. You will lead a force north. 100 riders. No banners. No engagements. You are ghosts. Observe, harass, burn if you find their flank unguarded. But do not provoke a full battle. Not yet. And if we capture prisoners? Taqi ad-Din asked. Bring them back. I would hear from the mouths of the men who build this wall. What dreams drive them after the council? Private chambers. Later that night, Saladin stood on the upper terrace of the palace, gazing down toward the east. A crescent moon hung over the desert edge, cold and silver. His physician, Al-Mu'taz, approached with a goblet of water and a linen-wrapped bundle. I prepared a honeyed balm, the physician said softly. You've not slept. Saladin accepted the water but ignored the bundle. I dreamed of Nur ad-Din last night, he murmured. He stood at a river's edge and pointed across. But there was no bridge. Only fire. Al-Mu'taz bowed his head. The mind speaks when words fall short. Saladin turned back to the dark. What kind of king builds a fortress on a fault line? He asked. Jacob's Ford is not simply a military act. It is a message. But I do not yet know what it says. Perhaps, said the physician, It says only that your enemy is willing to bleed. Saladin nodded slowly. Yes. And he means to bleed us. The Northern Watch. 5 days later, Taqi ad-Din rode through the broken passes north of the Jordan. Dust trailed behind his riders like smoke. They were veterans, chosen for their silence and cunning, not just their blades. Among them were desert scouts, Turkish bowmen, and even a pair of Christian converts, men who could pass unnoticed in the Frankish-held lands from a crag above the valley. They first saw it, the new construction. It sprawled like a wound across the river's western bank. Timber palisades framed the camp. Masons hammered stone blocks onto partially raised walls. Blacksmiths worked in the open, hammering hinges and brackets. Between scaffolds and carts, guards in heavy mail patrolled, serious, watchful. No idle nights. No feasting lords. We expected lumber and mud, one scout muttered. This is a fortress being born. Taqi ad-Din said nothing. He scanned the ridge lines and riverbeds, and then he saw them. Across the ford, half hidden behind an outcropping of pines, rows of strange machines. Not siege engines of the old sort, but taller, angular. Frames of thick timber with canvas covers and steel pivots. What are those? Asked a bowman. Taqi ad-Din narrowed his eyes. I don't know, he said. But they are not decorative. Saladin receives the report when the riders returned to Damascus. It was already September. The days had grown shorter, and with them, patience in Saladin's court. Taqi ad-Din stood before the map once more, dust still clinging to his cloak. They've built walls nearly 10 feet high, he said. 2 rings, though only the inner is stone so far. The outer seems temporary. They use cranes and hoists, faster than any construction I've seen. And the machines? Saladin asked, still unknown. Defensive, perhaps. Or for launching stones. But not traditional. And the men? Al-Adil asked. Mostly settlers. But not farmers. Not pilgrims. They drill daily. Their weapons are new. Uniform. Disciplined. Saladin absorbed the words in silence. Finally, he spoke. Then we must assume this is not a border watchtower. It is a statement. The Kingdom of Jerusalem intends to challenge us openly. Not only with steel, but with innovation. He stepped away from the table and looked east. And we will respond in kind. Chapter 41, The Unseen Line of Battle. October 1178, Jacob's Ford, Kingdom of Jerusalem. The air on the high ridge overlooking the Jordan River was growing cooler. Autumn came differently here than in the hills of Jerusalem, sharper in the evening, tinged with cedar sap and the rising musk of the river valley. Far below, where dust plumes once marked caravans and goats, a stone citadel now clawed its way out of the earth. Ethan, King Baldwin IV, stood with one hand on the weathered limestone ledge of a half-finished wall, the other clenched over the hilt of a ceremonial sword. He wore his silver mask as always now, not just for ceremony but for necessity. Beneath it, the lines of leprosy had slowed but not vanished. The itching and pain came less often thanks to Gerard's treatments and what he called a blessed sign. But Ethan knew better. It was mold, not miracles, working beneath the skin behind him. The rhythmic clank and thud of pulley lifts echoed against the half-built towers. Another load up, came the shout from below. A lattice of scaffolding, hoists, and track rails ran up the fortress's inner wall. Suspended on thick ropes and driven by an ingenious counterweight system, designed after Ethan sketched out basic principles of modern pulleys, a massive block of quarried stone rose like a ship's anchor into the sky. Odo of St. Amand stood beside him, arms folded across his chest, his white Templar mantle stained with dust. He watched the machinery with thin-lipped approval. This, Odo said, would have taken twice the labor and thrice the time. Ethan nodded. And we still have 5 years to go. Maybe 4, if we can keep the pulley cranes functioning through winter. Odo squinted toward the rising inner tower. 5 years. Saladin won't wait 5 years. No, Ethan agreed. But he won't know that we don't need 5 years. The fortress and the river Jacob's Ford, Vadamaya was more than a crossing. It was a fulcrum. To the east, Damascus lay within striking distance. To the west, the hill paths curled toward Acre, Saved, and the Galilean interior. The fording point here had once been a shallow seasonal crossing. Now it was a bulwark. The plan was ambitious, a full fortress with a double-walled curtain, 4 towers, 2 square and 2 rounded, a central keep, and a fortified bridgehead that would eventually span the Jordan itself. Inside the walls would lie a garrison chapel, barracks for 300 men, subterranean cisterns, and armories for siege engines and crossbows. Construction had begun in earnest the previous spring, following surveys and test wells. The terrain had proved difficult, the riverbank shifted under the weight of stone. But Ethan, drawing from memory, had instructed his engineers to sink layered timber piles for a foundation and reinforce them with gravel and lime mortar. More than 200 laborers now toiled under rotating shifts, protected by Templar patrols. Supplies arrived weekly from Acre and Montgisard. Timber for scaffolds, iron from northern Tripoli, and fresh horses from the south. Several cranes, each built under Ethan's sketches, hoisted material upward with half the manpower traditional systems required. The pulley systems have cut lifting times in half, said Master Aelric, the chief builder, during a briefing earlier that week. The tension problem on the larger wheel has been solved by wrapping the axles in treated hide, like you suggested, sire. Ethan had merely nodded, thankful that medieval physics, though clumsy, obeyed the same rules, but the size of the project still staggered even him. 5 years. Even accelerated, it would take that long for the keep and inner walls to reach completion. That was a compromise. Most fortresses took 7 to 10 years, longer without consistent funding and protection. Yet Jacob's Ford would soon be functional, defensible, even if not finished. The signs of watching eyes. It was Odo who first raised the alert. There have been watchers, riders, silhouettes in the hills. They leave no trail, no confrontation. But they're no merchants. Ethan had already known. Reports from patrols and forward scouts confirmed it. Saladin's intelligence net was active again. The scouts came no closer than 2 miles, but they were watching not just the fortress, but the supplier routes and nearby Templar stations. They've seen the pulleys, Ethan said one evening in the command tent. That'll catch their attention. Good, Odo replied. Let them wonder. Balian arrived 2 days later, his cloak still damp from the northern rains. He'd come with updates on troop deployments in Galilee, and to finalize a strategy Ethan had begun piecing together their stock. Balian said over a steaming cup of watered wine, that Damascus fears this fortress will become a second Jerusalem. A new seed of strength. They're not wrong, Ethan replied. The 3 men leaned over a map laid across a chest of mortar bags. It showed more than topography. Ethan had personally added contour lines, elevation markers, and estimated siege encampments based on Saladin's known patterns. We'll use this fortress to draw him in, Ethan said. Saladin can't let this stand. Not this close to Damascus. But he won't rush in until he knows we've invested everything here. He'll bring his full host, Balian said, and that's exactly what we want. Planning the trap. Ethan outlined the plan again, with refinements. Instead of overtly deploying troops to Jacob's Ford, they would send units to nearby forts and castles under the guise of reinforcement rotations. From there, they would gradually shift into preset ambush positions, cavalry concealed in wooded valleys, crossbow regiments dug into camouflage trenches, and pike units drilled for counter-assaults in uneven terrain. Everything, Ethan told them, must appear disjointed, accidental. Like the pieces are scattered and slow. Then, when Saladin strikes, we close the jaws to maintain secrecy. Ethan used a simplified cipher for all orders, and only key officers like Balian and Odo received the full operational picture. Men were drilled in small detachments under cover of night, and even campfires were reduced in visibility by new hooded braziers. Odo had also begun testing new shield formations, crossbowmen behind rows of overlapping pavizes, while pike companies drilled in square and staggered wedge shapes designed for rough terrain. Ethan observed their practice from a low-rise days later and made adjustments. Too tight, he said of one square formation. Widen the second rank. We'll need room for lateral movement if cavalry flank them down. And faith. One night, as a dry wind rolled in from the east, Ethan met privately with Gerard, his physician and spiritual confidant. They speak of miracles, Gerard said, examining Ethan's left arm where the lesions had slowly receded. The men whisper of signs, your strength returning, your mind untouched. Some say God has anointed you for this war. Ethan smiled under the mask, a flicker of irony passing through him. It wasn't God. It was mold in a jar. Then perhaps God sent you the mold. Gerard closed the bandage and placed a damp cloth over the wrist. You walk a line, he said softly. One between heaven's favor and the burden of foresight. Do not walk it alone. Ethan nodded. A fortress still rising as October deepened, the walls rose another few feet. The main gate tower had begun to show the carved stonework at its upper levels, simple crosses and chevrons, cut by Armenian masons working alongside locals and Italians. Ethan insisted on no banners yet. No finished chapel. Nothing to suggest completion. Let it seem vulnerable, let it seem unfinished, and let Saladin take the bait. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 42, The Blade Before the Gate. Late October, 1178, Damascus. The shadows were long across Damascus. Smoke curled from the brick ovens of the lower quarter, while the minarets cast slanted lines across the citadel's domes. Within, beneath vaults patterned with turquoise and gold, Saladin Yusuf ibn Ayyub, Sultan of Egypt and Syria, stood before the bronze relief of the Levant, lit dimly by evening firelight. His fingers hovered over the Jordan River, over a place once of little note. Now it was whispered in every corner of his court. Jacob's Ford, a Frankish fortress, was rising there, stone on stone, day by day, with an efficiency that unnerved his engineers. The banks of the upper Jordan, once a remote crossing, now bristled with palisades and watchtowers, and workers moved with a discipline uncommon among the Crusaders. Even his informants reported strange devices lifting stone blocks higher and faster than traditional hoists. But more troubling was the man who built it. The masked king. Rumors called him Al-Malik al-Mukanna, a leper cloaked in silver, whose gaze behind a cold mask turned sand into fortress and disarray into purpose. A king of illness and intellect. To Saladin, this was not the Baldwin IV he remembered. Something, or someone, had changed. Council of where he will strike first. His words stilled the chamber. Al-Adil, his brother, frowned. Farrukhshah, his nephew, leaned forward. Karakush folded his arms. 7 emirs stood along the wall, some from Egypt, others from the Syrian marches. If we wait until spring, Saladin said, the fortress will be finished. Stone walls, towers, moats, and more men. We have but 7,000, and only that because Hama and Cairo have answered, Al-Adil reminded him. The Zangids silk in the north. Aleppo is still dealing with tribal revolt. If we fail, we will not fail. Saladin moved to the edge of the map. They build fast, yes, but they have not yet completed it. The western and southern walls are still low. Their towers half standing. They've carved a base, not a bulwark. And though they hide their strength, our scouts saw their banners. There are no more than a few hundred garrisoning it now. Farrukhshah nodded. A force of engineers and guards. Not an army. They think us watching from afar, Saladin said, voice tightening. But if we march now, fast, we can reach Jacob's Ford in less than 2 weeks. Hit hard. Burn what they've raised. And kill this myth of the masked king before it hardens into truth. A map of opportunity. The room darkened with dusk. Lamps were lit. The fire popped in the hearth. Saladin traced a path with a gloved finger, from Damascus south to Banias, then west across the Golan's ridges. The fords here are narrow. We can move lightly, cavalry, fast infantry, horse archers. Avoid the main roads. Strike at dawn, out of the mist. Take them before their lookouts report back to Jerusalem. They'll still have scouts, said Karakush. They do. But they're watching for armies, not raiders. If we disguise our column as a tribal caravan, our numbers will look smaller, until we strike. And if reinforcements come, Al-Adil asked. They won't come fast enough, Saladin replied. Our spies say the roads near Safed are under construction. That means heavy supply traffic. Any army from Jerusalem will move slower than we will. And the Leper King can't ride fast. He won't risk open field battle unless he's certain. There was a long pause. No one contradicted him. The masked king privately, that night. Saladin dictated a letter to his personal scribe. This masked king, whether he be Baldwin or a spirit who wears his face, has reshaped the kingdom's spine. I do not believe in magic, nor do I chase shadows. But this man, whoever he is, must be struck before he turns the hills of Galilee into walls of iron and fire. In the weeks prior, stories had reached Damascus of new machines, engines able to hurl stones with terrifying precision, of crossbowmen drilling in new formations. He had not yet seen these things, only their effects: fortresses built faster than ever, patrols disciplined and quiet, roads being laid with Roman efficiency, and all of it came from behind the silver mask. Some of his imams whispered this king was possessed. Others said he was the Mahdi of the Franks. A few thought him just a dying boy made dangerous by desperation. Saladin did not know which was true. And that uncertainty was more dangerous than any army assembly begins. By the third day after the council, the courtyards outside Damascus filled with riders. The Mamluks arrived first, heavy cavalry with thick mail and scimitars curved like sickles. Then came the desert Arab horsemen, light and fast, their lances painted black and gold. Supply wagons followed, sacks of grain, salted mutton, leather waterskins. Campfire smoke curled through the olive trees outside the city. Saladin kept the muster quiet. No messengers were sent beyond his trusted lieutenants. No declarations. No threats. Only quiet preparation. He walked the lines himself, checking saddle straps, inspecting arrowheads, asking names. Men straightened as he passed. His presence was not ceremonial, it was tactical. Saladin believed in leading from the front, and they knew it. 2 weeks, he told Al-Adil. No more will be ready, his brother said. But this will be no siege. It will be slaughter or retreat, and we slaughter, Saladin replied, testing the edge. A few days later, his forward scouts brought back new reports. Crusader patrols along the Jordan had increased. Small signal towers had gone up in the hills near Safed, with smoke protocols and mounted messengers. The Franks were not blind, but their movements were slow, measured, likely overconfident in their half-built fortress. And most important, they still believed Saladin was focused elsewhere. That belief would be their undoing. The plan. Saladin shared the final plan only with his top 3 commanders. They would move under the cover of trade, a column of horsemen hidden within a string of camel and donkey caravans. Grain sacks and water jars would conceal shields and bows. Marching east of the Sea of Galilee, they would reach the lower Golan, cross at night, and strike Jacob's Ford from the north. A detachment of 500 archers would circle wide and pin down the garrison's western towers. Meanwhile, the main body, Mamluk heavy cavalry and shock troops, would ride straight for the fortress gate. They would destroy what they could, kill or capture the builders, and withdraw before any reinforcement could mount a defense. Speed. Precision. Shock. They would leave fire and ruin on the eve of departure. On the last evening of October, Saladin stood atop the outer ramparts of Damascus. The stars were thick above, the crescent moon pale and low below him. 7,000 men readied for war, not the full might of Islam, but enough. Enough to strike. Enough to remind the Franks that they were not safe. He looked east, toward Jerusalem. Toward the silver-masked king. A fortress is a wall, he murmured, but surprise is a sword. Chapter 43, Setting the Trap. Early November, 1178. The hills above Jacob's Ford. The wind was dry and cool that morning, carrying the dust and scent of river reeds across the hills overlooking Jacob's Ford. Beneath a makeshift tent set high above the still unfinished fortress, King Baldwin IV, known among his men as the Masked King, stood staring across the eastern ridges. Ethan squinted behind his silver mask. His right eye was weeping again, a slow irritation from the leprosy's damage, but he ignored it. Saladin was on the move. He could feel it, no longer just a possibility, but a storm forming on the horizon. His scouts had reported unusual caravan movements out of Damascus. Not massive army banners or fanfare. Just too many pack animals for standard merchant trains. Too many riders with scars and sharp eyes pretending to be traders. They were trying to hide it. That meant they were coming, and fast, Your Majesty, Balian said, pulling up his horse alongside him. Reports from the safed riders confirmed the eastern hill passes show churned earth, fresh hoofprints and broken scrub along the trade route. He's coming. Not in force, but fast. Ethan nodded slowly. He wants speed over weight. Which means he's gambling on surprise. Otto of St. Emond, Grand Master of the Templars, joined them. How long? 5, maybe 6 days, Ethan replied. He's betting that we can't respond in time. That Jacob's Ford is still a vulnerable scar. He looked back toward the fortress. Scaffolds rose against the sky, surrounded by partially finished curtain walls and square towers. The main keep space was complete, but it would be years before the entire structure reached its final height. That didn't matter. It wasn't a fortress that would win this battle. It was what surrounded it. An army in secret. In the preceding weeks, Ethan had quietly pulled forces together from across the kingdom of Jerusalem. Orders had gone out by fast riders to Acre, Tiberias, and Montfort. From Tyre and Jaffa, he had summoned knights in small groups, avoiding spectacle now. 5,000 men were gathering in secret behind the hills and forests north and west of the ford. Among them 500 knights, well-armored, disciplined, and eager for battle, 3,500 infantry, a mix of seasoned crusaders and militiamen who had been drilling every month per Ethan's new regulations, engineers and sappers. 300 in all, trained to build, demolish, and trap, and most importantly, 8 storm racks. The crossbow-based volley machines, modified from his memory of Korean hwachas, had been mounted on wheeled carriages and adapted for high-angle firing. Each could launch 40 iron-tipped bolts in a single eruption, with a reload time of 3 minutes if manned properly. No fire. No smoke. Just steel and wood, brutally simple and deadly. Ethan walked with Balian and Otto through a newly dug trench that curved like a serpent around a low rise south of the fortress. I want 3 of the storm racks here, here, and here, Ethan said, pointing with his gloved hand. Covering the eastern approach and the main gate slope. If he comes in hard, He'll be funneled between these two ridge lines. That's where we'll break him. Balian frowned. He may circle south. He won't, Ethan said. That path is longer and more exposed. He's coming for the throat. Fast and direct. His scouts think this is lightly defended. Otto grinned. Then let us show them how wrong they are. The ground beneath their feet. Ethan's engineers began preparing layered defenses. They had less than a week, but with proper planning, they could force Saladin's men into kill zones. Camouflage pit traps were dug along narrow defiles in the approach road, designed to swallow a horse or snap a man's leg. Sharpened stakes, soaked in brine, hidden beneath dirt and brush. False trails to mislead scouts. A stone dam, disguised as part of a quarry wall, was partially rigged to flood a narrow creek bed on Ethan's signal, turning solid ground into mud. More than once, Ethan found himself drawing trench patterns into the dirt, visualizing ancient Roman entrenchments, Napoleonic artillery lines, and early modern kill zones. We don't need to match his numbers, Ethan told his officers. We need to control where the fight happens. At night, he stood by firelight, drawing plans in charcoal, adjusting angles of fields of fire, calculating how far the storm racks could reach, when the bolts would arc, when to charge. A cloak of silence. The scouts were doubled. Riders from Safed, Tiberias, and Banias now patrolled in staggered loops, reporting every merchant caravan, every goat herder, every suspicious campfire. Dismounted patrols crept along the eastern ridge lines with polished glass lenses, primitive but effective, mounted in wooden tubes. Ethan had quietly implemented the use of mirrors and flags for signaling between posts, simple semaphore based on line of sight. It allowed messengers to send alerts faster than a horseman could ride. He called his lead scoutmaster into the tent late one evening. From now on, assume your enemy sees everything, Ethan told him. That means your real goal is to deny him his own eyes. Turn every one of his scouts around. Misdirect. Block. Confuse. Blind him. The scoutmaster saluted. We'll make him march blindfolded, sire. The calm before the storm. On the 4th day of November, a low mist crept over the hills near the Jordan. The fortress at Jacob's Ford, though still unfinished, stood like a silent sentinel beside the river. Smoke rose from forges and fires. Supply trains moved discreetly. But behind the quiet, an army was waiting. Ethan stood on a bluff just west of the main road. Balian approached on horseback, his helmet under one arm. All is in motion, Balian said. And Saladin? Ethan asked. He's on the way. He crossed the Jordan yesterday. He'll be within striking distance in 5 days, maybe less. Ethan's eyes narrowed behind his mask. Then we don't waste a moment. He looked at the slope where the final palisade was being installed, then turned toward the rows of infantry running drills in tight formation, crossbowmen kneeling, reloading in rhythm, while pikemen locked shields above them. We don't need 5 years to finish this fortress, Ethan said, more to himself than to Balian. We only need 5 days to make it a graveyard. Chapter 44, The Masked Hammer. Dawn prayers and blessings before the clash of swords, before the volley of bolts. Ethan, King Baldwin IV, sat among his men in the dusky tent of the Templar Grand Master. Candles flickered against the linen walls, casting dancing shadows on the faces of knights, infantry captains, and engineers. A priest in simple habit knelt before them, holding a golden chalice and reading in Latin. Grant, O Lord, wisdom in counsel, courage in battle, and mercy in victory, the priest intoned. Around him, men bowed their heads. Many had knelt for the first time that morning, humbled not by choice, but by the weight of what came next. Ethan knelt, too, masked, but bowed, feeling the leprosy ache in his joints. The priest drizzled holy water on the chalice. For Baldwin, your servant and king, he said, lifting the cup. The men drank, a sip of wine diluted with water, a promise of divine presence. As the priest finished, men embraced, knights clasped mailed fists, infantry patted each other's backs. The engineers adjusted straps on storm racks with renewed purpose. Even the militia, farmers and townsfolk drilled into soldiers, stood straighter. The rite was not superstition, it was union. A covenant. Ethan rose last, silence filling the tent as he looked over the faces of his 5,000 men. 500 knights, 3,500 infantry, and 300 engineers and storm rack crews. Above them, banners fluttered, red crosses on white, silver lions, and a silent emblem of faith. There is no greater fight, Ethan spoke quietly, masking his raspy tone, than one fought for the land we build, the people we protect, and the faith we trust. Then he turned to steal the first charge. By mid-morning the mist had burned off. The blue sky was crisp. From vantage points in the ridge, Ethan saw the glint of Saladin's banners 6 miles away. The Sultan had arrived with speed, fast cavalry plus his light infantry. No siege ladders, no catapults, just swift steel and faith and surprise. Suddenly, drums sounded below. The Muslim cavalry charged first from the east. The fast horsemen descended the slope toward the ford. Roughly 2,000 strong, they moved like a wave, confident that they would sweep through the militia before the storm racks had time to volley. But Ethan had prepared more than 1,000 militia pikemen, drilled monthly for the past year, had been hidden in terraced fields behind low walls. Their 12 to 15-foot pikes glinted in the sun. Kneeling crossbowmen, braced behind shields and fallen logs, waited behind staggered pivizes when the cavalry neared, first with loose arrow volleys, then with trumpets blowing for shock. The militia held their ground. The pikes didn't waver as horses thundered into them. The crossbows fired, bolts thudding into leather and iron. Riders and mounts tumbled, screams piercing the roars of hoofs. 1,000-year tradition of cavalry dominance cracked against pole and crossbow. The charge faltered. Cavalry spun, scattered, recoiled. The discipline of Baldwin's men held firm, immovable as stone. Saladin watched from a ridge along with his emirs, fury and shock in his eyes. His first strike, he realized, had failed. Bring forward the infantry, he commanded. He rallied foot soldiers, Mamluks, Bedouin archers, and auxiliary infantry, toward the ridge overlooking Jacob's Ford. Their banners advanced slowly. In method and formation they reached the unfinished gatehouse wall and began to push up. Some clambered over wooden scaffolding, others defended low parapets with burning pitch. The defenders atop the curtain wall poured boiling oil and hurled stones. Crossbowmen peered through arrow loops and sniped at exposed faces. Saladin's men leapt again, trying to seize the north tower. They nearly gained purchase on a scaffold, but then a volley from another storm rack raked across their flank, forcing them back into the dust. At this moment, Ethan lowered the spyglass. They believe we defend the fortress, he said to Odo. The Grand Master nodded. Let them believe our strength resides there, Odo answered. The trap closes. Ethan pressed his lips and mouthed the words. His signal was sent now. From the east ravines and shaded tree lines, storm rack volleys launched again, this time into the dense pack of infantry assaulting the gatehouse. Pike squares lurched into action, pivoting from center to flank. Saladin's infantry, jammed near the wall, found themselves caught between iron points and bolts. Meanwhile, engineers released the flood from the upstream dam. A sudden torrent roared down a narrow creek bed behind Saladin's advancing ranks. Mud and churning water stalled foot soldiers, horses fell, grasping uselessly. Shouts and panic rose as the water surged. 200 knights led by Lord Amori of Jaffa broke from concealment and thundered into Saladin's rear guard, then swept across captured wagons and supplies, severing retreat routes simultaneously. Balian and 300 infantry, half shield, half pike, marched out from the ridge in a wedge and slammed into Saladin's left flank. Ethan descended from the ridge with 50 elite crossbowmen. They moved with calm precision, firing into the Sultan's highest officers. Arrows thudded into saddles and mail. Officers fell, soldiers paused. Saladin rode close to the center, trying to rally his men, but now they were surrounded, river in front, broken flank on one side, heavy cavalry carving through the other. His column collapsed into confusion. The retreat and restraint. Balian's voice drifted up the slope. They break. They break. Saladin reined in his horse. His bodyguards formed a tight circle around him. The Sultan, wounded but unbowed, spurred his horse back toward the west ridge, where darkness and retreat awaited. On the ridge, Ethan signaled the warriors to stand fast. From the valley below, hoofbeats, screams, and panic echoed. Do not pursue the Sultan. Ethan shouted, his voice carried by heralds. Let him go. Let him flee. Let this ground bear witness, and let the story carry north, east, west. Let them fear the masked king. Odo reined in a few eager knights. A royal hunt would be glorious, he said. But you preach fear. Ethan nodded into the wind. Fear is currency. The aftermath. By nightfall the battlefield quieted. Wisdom whispered through the camp. Fires were lit carefully. Wounded were tended. The captured were gathered. Over 1,200 of Saladin's men lay dead or bleeding. Several hundred more lay bound miles to the west on the ridge. Ethan walked beside Balian as campfires glowed below the fortress walls. We gambled, and we won, Balian said, voice soft in the night. Ethan looked up at the silent towers partially rising against the sky. But this fortress is still unfinished, Ethan replied. Saladin now knows we are clever. He will rebuild. He will retaliate. As dawn broke the next morning, the golden cross of Jerusalem fluttered above the unfinished stone walls. The wolves of rumor and fear stalked far beyond the field. The masked king, wounded, enigmatic, alive, remained, the blade poised between thought and steel. Chapter 45, Ashes and Echoes. November 10, 1178. 2 days after the battle at Jacob's Ford south of the Jordan, Saladin's camp. The ground was still wet with blood. Torn banners flapped against the charred husks of supply wagons, and half-buried corpses marked where the fiercest fighting had turned the soil to mud. What had once been the vanguard of Saladin's army now resembled a funeral procession with no destination. The tents were gone, either burned in the retreat or hastily abandoned. Saladin sat beneath a worn silk awning, propped by scavenged spears. The air was thick with smoke and failure. His guards, fewer now, watched the hills in silence, eyes wide and sleep-starved. A scribe knelt before him, reading from a scroll written in hurried Syriac. 4,000 dead. 1,500 captured. Dozens of senior emirs are missing or confirmed taken. The rest, scattered. Saladin said nothing at first. He studied the embers of the last fire, lips pressed into a thin line. His black robes were dirted with ash and blood, and though his left hand trembled slightly from a glancing wound across the shoulder, he kept it hidden beneath his cloak. "Where is Nasir al-Din?" he asked quietly. "Dead, Sultan," the scribe replied. He led the final charge and was impaled on a Frankish pike. His horse was brought down by the crossbowman. Saladin's jaw tightened. Nasir had been one of his most trusted lancers from Hama, young, bold, and devout. Gone now, like too many others. And to what? A fortress barely a year old, defended by conscripted peasants and a leper king. But no, Saladin knew better. This had not been mere chance or holy fervor. This had been strategy. Brutal, modern, and precise. He stood slowly, brushing the dust from his cloak. "He baited us," Saladin murmured. "He made Jacob's Ford look vulnerable, but it was a trap. Every move we made was anticipated. And those weapons, they were not of this world." Amir Khalil limped forward, leaning heavily on a spear haft. "Those volley machines, the ones that fired dozens of bolts at once, no Muslim army has faced such before. And the militia, they didn't break. Their formation, pikes, crossbows, discipline, it was like striking stone." Saladin turned his gaze eastward toward Damascus, still 2 weeks' ride north, veiled in desert haze. He spoke low, almost to himself. "He's changing the nature of war." Khalil's brows furrowed. "What shall we tell the governors of Aleppo and Mosul?" "The truth," Saladin said. "That we lost. That a new type of Frank rules Jerusalem, and he is not content to wait behind its walls." He looked again toward the smoking ruins of their camp, then issued his next order: "Break camp at dusk. We return to Damascus. Send word ahead. Every garrison commander must fortify. Every emir must prepare for a different kind of war then, softer, and I will have his name written in a black book." Jacob's Ford, fortress command chamber. Later that evening, the stone walls of the command tower were still calling from the battle. The air smelled of oil, iron, and ash. Baldwin, Ethan, stood before a wide table, maps unrolled and marked with charcoal. He wore no crown, just a battered mail shirt and the silver mask that now bore faint scratches from a glancing arrow. He did not yet sit. Victory had not earned him rest. The reports had been coming in steadily since midday. Saladin's army was in retreat. Dead, over 4,000. Captured, 1,500. Most of the officers had fled or perished in the crush the pike squares held. The crossbows fired true. The storm racks had cut bloody corridors through elite cavalry. Ethan's expression remained fixed, cold. He traced the Jordan River with his gloved finger, then tapped the hill line where the ambush had been sprung. "It worked," he said finally. Everything worked. Balian of Ibelin, still splattered with dried mud, nodded solemnly. "They didn't expect a militia to hold. Their lancers broke against the first row of pikes. Your square held like a wall of iron." Odo of St. Emond, Grand Master of the Templars, stepped forward next. His white mantle was stained at the hem, but his voice rang clear. "Never in my lifetime have I seen such discipline among farmers and craftsmen. They fought like trained men. And those bolt launchers, the ones your engineers built, storm racks, as you call them, they tore open the Muslim lines." Ethan didn't smile. He merely nodded once. "The storm racks will be improved. I've already spoken with Alphonse, the engineer. We can shorten the reload time and increase the angle of elevation." He paused, then looked to both the men. "Saladin's not gone. He's wounded, yes, but he'll recover. If he's smart, and he is, he'll shift focus to Syria. But he now knows, we are not the same kingdom he once tested." Balian leaned forward, voice low. "This victory changes everything. The barons, those who doubted, will be silent now. Even in Europe, This news will echo. Ethan reached beneath the table and withdrew a sealed message, already penned that morning, in anticipation it's ready. Cardinal Otto will deliver it to Rome. It includes details of the battle, the strength of our forces, and a report on Saladin's retreat. I want it read aloud to the College of Cardinals. Otto's eyes narrowed behind his mail hood. And the message to Constantinople: reinforce Gaza. Their cataphracts are to remain in the south, but we need to begin naval coordination in the Levant. He turned to Balian. I want the militia rotated. Rest those who held the line. Bring in the next cohort. Monthly training continues. Pike and crossbow formations, discipline above all. Balian nodded. I'll oversee it personally. Ethan stepped away from the table and toward a narrow window slit. Outside, the fires of the encamped Christian army still burned, 5,000 men, victorious yet disciplined. The wounded had already begun rotating back to Jerusalem. Supply lines were holding. And most importantly, the fortress still stood, mostly intact. He let the silence linger, then spoke again, more softly. Today wasn't just a battle. It was proof. Otto raised an eyebrow. Proof that this kingdom can be something more than a Crusader outpost clinging to holy stone. We can be something enduring. Ordered. Civilized. Stronger than fear. He turned back to his commanders, the silver mask catching firelight like a moon over steel. We build more fortresses. We reinforce the pike lines. We increase production of the storm racks. And we never let our guard down. Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, let it be known across the land, Jerusalem stands, not by miracle, but by will. Chapter 46, Stones and Shadows. Date, November 14, 1178. 4 days after the Battle of Jacob's Ford, the battlefield had gone quiet. The screams and cries of wounded men had faded into the wind, and now, only the low drone of hammers and pulleys echoed from the hill where the fortress stood. The air was cold, heavy with the scent of scorched wood and churned earth. Fog clung to the Jordan River at dawn, drifting like ghosts among the dead trees. But Jacob's Ford was alive again. Construction had resumed. Men moved with renewed urgency, masons, carpenters, engineers, ox drivers, and water bearers. Laborers repaired broken scaffoldings and repositioned cranes. Stone blocks were hauled up the slope using the new pulleys and gear system, a mechanical innovation that Ethan had brought from memory. Sturdy wooden winches with toothed cogs and balance weights that tripled lifting speed and cut labor strain by half. Progress, once agonizingly slow, was now methodical, controlled, and relentless. Atop the central bluff, the partially built inner keep rose like a defiant fist, its walls thicker now thanks to adjusted designs from Ethan's notes, 3 meters deep at the base, sloped slightly to better deflect trebuchet fire. The battered sections from the battle were already being reinforced with limestone quarried from nearby cliffs. The engineers had even begun to dig an internal well, to ensure that in any future siege, the fortress would not fall from thirst. Command Ridge, Jacob's Ford. Midday. Ethan stood beside Balian of Ibelin and Odo of St. Emond. A scroll of updated plans stretched across a field table that had been hastily set beside the still smoking remnants of a battering ram. He wore no cloak, just his mail and that ever-present silver mask, now polished, though a faint crack still ran across the right cheek from a blow that nearly took his life. We've cut the construction time by almost a third, Ethan said, pointing to the timeline on the scroll. Before the new pulleys, we were estimating 5 years. Now, with full labor rotation and a second quarry team from Jerusalem, we're looking at 3.5, maybe 4 years, if the weather holds and logistics stay smooth. Otto raised an eyebrow. And if the Sultan returns, he will, Ethan said. But he will need time to rebuild. Our scouts say he's withdrawn to Damascus, and there are still revolts in Aleppo and Sinjar. For now, the initiative is ours. Balian tapped a red mark on the diagram, indicating the outer curtain wall. These angled bastions, this is where you'll place the storm racks, Ethan nodded. Exactly. 2 along the riverfront, 1 embedded above the southern gate, and 1 atop the east-facing tower. When they fire in overlapping arcs, they create kill zones that no light cavalry will dare cross. The crossbow crews will be trained to reload under partial cover, using rotating fire. And the garrison? Otto asked. We leave behind a rotating force of 400 men, 100 Templars, 100 Hospitallers, and 200 militia. They'll cycle in from Jerusalem and the coast in 3-month shifts. Meanwhile, we continue training the pike and crossbow formations. He paused, looking out across the half-built fortress, then back toward the distant hills. Saladin will assume we're weakened from the battle. Let him believe it. We'll build faster in that shadow. November 17, 1178. 3 days later the weather turned gray, with light rains dusting the construction site and cold mist. Still, the work continued. A new supply road was being carved between the ford and the road to Jerusalem. Ethan's engineers, drawing inspiration from Roman designs, planned it with proper drainage and flat paving stones to allow for fast transport of siege equipment and reinforcements. On the west side of the river, the watchtower that had first spotted Saladin's army was being rebuilt as a more permanent signal tower, taller, with an oil lamp signaling system that could send basic codes to Jerusalem and Tiberias. Ethan personally inspected the storm rack crews, who had been moved into a temporary workshop erected beside the barracks. The machines, massive wooden racks capable of launching 30 to 40 bolts in a volley, were being repaired and upgraded under the supervision of Alphonse the engineer. 3-minute reloads, Alphonse reported. But we've begun testing a crank-assisted lever system, might cut it to 2. Do it, Ethan said. We need faster rotation. 1 volley every 2 minutes changes everything in siege warfare. November 20th, 1178 Jerusalem, Royal Council Chamber. Though Ethan remained at the ford, messengers rode daily between the fortress and Jerusalem. In the Holy City, work had begun on new quartermaster protocols for supplying distant fortresses. Grain stockpiles were being standardized and munitions crates constructed to house crossbow bolts, nails, rope, and preserved pitch for defense. Hospitaller scribes began copying standardized manuals for militia training, simple diagrams of pike square formations, crossbow reloading sequences, and supply management practices. Though no formal schools yet existed, Ethan's vision of a literate officer corps was quietly forming. The nobles of the realm, those still reeling from the news of victory, had begun to send their own sons to observe the pike formations. What had once been seen as crude militia was now recognized as the backbone of a new kind of army. November 22, 1178 Jacob's Ford. The fortress's chapel, barely more than a stone skeleton with a wooden roof, held a brief ceremony. A priest, aged and solemn, stepped forward to bless the dead. Templars, Hospitallers, peasants, even a few Muslim prisoners bowed with respect. Ethan stood silently in the back, hood drawn low, gloved hands clasped before him. He did not speak. Not here. But when the rites ended, he walked with Balian to the overlook above the river. We held, Ethan said softly. But this is just the beginning. Balian folded his arms. You've changed the kingdom in a year. A generation's work done in months. Ethan shook his head. We've only laid the first stone. The real test will come when Saladin returns, not with 7,000, but with 20,000, he pointed to the horizon. And when that day comes, we'll meet him not with prayer and desperation, but with pikes in formation, bolts in flight, and a wall that does not break. Balian glanced at him, voice lowered. And if that day never comes, Ethan didn't hesitate. Then we build a kingdom so strong, he wouldn't dare. Chapter 47, The Marble Court Weighs Steel. December 19, 1178 Constantinople. A cold sea wind slipped through the marbled arches of the great palace, fluttering silk banners and stirring braziers with flickering embers. Snow had not yet touched the city, but the gray sky above hinted at its approach. Inside the candlelit chambers of the tricliness of the 19 couches, the imperial court gathered in hushed urgency. The emperor, Manuel I Comnenus, sat enthroned in purple and sable, a golden diadem resting across his graying brow. Before him, a courier from Antioch knelt, his boots caked in road dirt, his face pale with exhaustion. He had brought not rumor but confirmed reports from the Levant, a battle fought near Jacob's Ford, on the upper Jordan. A decisive battle. A slaughter. The emperor's fingers curled over the edges of the scroll. 4,000 of Saladin's warriors slain, he read aloud, and another 1,500 taken prisoner. All in a single engagement. His voice echoed through the chamber like the chime of iron against marble. No one dared interrupt him. To be defeated so thoroughly, and so far north, at the very gateway to Damascus. This changes much. The courier bowed again and was dismissed. Alexius Doukas, general of the western Tagmata, stepped forward with cautious confidence. Majesty, if the Sultan of Egypt is bleeding, now is the time to shift pressure northward. The Sultanate of Rum is vulnerable. Their eastern marches are scarcely defended, and the Seljuk Beyliks have not forgotten their internal rivalries. Manuel nodded slowly. And what of the Latin kingdom? This victory came not from the Templars alone, nor the Franks acting out of desperation. This was a planned action. Coordinated. Measured. Isaacus Angelos, golden-robed and sharp-eyed, cleared his throat. King Baldwin. They say he's transformed the kingdom. His soldiers move in drilled formations, pike squares backed by crossbows. His engineers construct weapons that defy explanation. The fortress at Jacob's Ford was not simply a defensive wall, It was a trap, built to draw Saladin in. There were murmurs. One of the senators leaned forward. You believe Baldwin seeks more than defense? I believe he already holds it. This is a man remaking the Levant by force of will and vision. Do we have proof it was him? Not the Templars, Nicephorus the historian answered. The Templars fought, yes, but under his command. Odo of St. Amand defers to Baldwin now, at least in military matters. Reports from Acre and Tyre say that Baldwin has reorganized the nobility, established new workshops, and brought strange practices to Jerusalem's court. The emperor rose from his throne, pulling his mantle around him as if to shield himself from the cold deliberation hanging in the chamber. This King Baldwin is a variable, Manuel said. But he has handed us an opportunity. Saladin is preoccupied. There are murmurs of unrest in Mosul and Hayran. The eastern emirs have grown restless. If the Franks continue their ascent, they may draw Muslim strength southward, and weaken the Anatolian front. He turned to Hwachas. What of Konya, the Sultan of Ramazil? Hwachas replied. His sons bicker over succession. Garrison strength along the Sangarius is weak. Iconium's walls remain solid, but the countryside is restive. Then we prepare, Manuel said. We do not yet act, but we position ourselves. Quietly he stepped toward the high window that overlooked the Bosphorus, the golden dome of Hagia Sophia visible in the far mists. Send discreet envoys to Antioch and Cilicia. Begin reopening talks with the Armenian lords. Offer incentives for border trade, and inquire about military cooperation, not against the Franks, but against the Seljuks. Make no direct promises. Let them believe we are weighing options. And the Latin kingdom, asked Isachias, reach out with care. A letter. A gesture of imperial courtesy. A gift to the church in Jerusalem, perhaps through Rome. Let them know we see what they are doing, and that we approve. Quietly the council bowed. We shall watch the east and sharpen our swords. When the time comes, we will reclaim what was taken. Manuel Comnenus turned back toward the court, eyes alight beneath the weight of age. And if Baldwin truly is a man of vision, then he may prove a sword pointed not at Byzantium, but toward Damascus and beyond. Chapter 48, Rumors of Steel in Scripture. December 1178. Lateran Palace, Rome. Winter cloaked the eternal city in its cold hush, but within the Lateran Palace, the air was thick with incense and the quiet thunder of debate. Beneath the flickering candlelight and towering arches of the consistory hall, the College of Cardinals had assembled under the gaze of the Supreme Pontiff. The hall was silent as Cardinal Odo di Castellari stepped forward, the echo of his boots fading behind him. His face was weathered from travel, but his voice carried the conviction of a man who had witnessed something profound. Your Holiness. Eminent brothers. I bring word not only of survival, but of triumph. He unfurled a parchment scroll and began to read, though he scarcely needed the words. On the eastern frontier of Christendom, near the place known as Jacob's Ford, the army of Saladin attempted a swift and overwhelming assault on a fortress still under construction. He brought no fewer than 7,000 men, hoping to crush the defenses before they were ready. And he failed, asked Cardinal Bernard of Tours, eyes narrowed in disbelief. He failed decisively, Odo said, nodding. Over 4,000 of his warriors now lie dead. Another 1,500 were taken prisoner. The king, Baldwin of Jerusalem, commanded the battle personally. His forces were a mere 5,000, including 500 knights and the city militia. But they fought with the precision and discipline of seasoned legions. Several cardinals exchanged glances. Some whispered. Others crossed themselves. Tell us what happened, Pope Alexander. I said softly. In full. Cardinal Odo did not hesitate. Baldwin used the terrain as his ally. The approach to the fortress was rigged with traps, camouflage pits, concealed palisades, narrow kill zones. Scouts gave Saladin false impressions of the garrison's strength. The Saracens believed they were attacking a weak post. They found instead a wall of pikes and crossbow fire. He paused, letting the gravity of it sink in. The first charge, like cavalry, was shattered by the pike squares. The militia held. They stood firm. They moved as one. I saw the drills weeks earlier in Jerusalem, and I did not believe it then. But it worked. When Saladin committed the bulk of his army to press the fortress, Baldwin unleashed a hidden reserve, cavalry and infantry sweeping from the flanks. Even stranger weapons were deployed, mechanisms that fired volleys of bolts at terrifying speed, like a thunderstorm of iron. The storm racks, murmured Cardinal Amato. You mentioned them before. Yes, Odo confirmed. Storm racks. Complex, mechanical devices unlike anything I've seen in the West. Operated by teams of engineers. And Baldwin led this personally, asked Cardinal Romano, incredulous. He was there. Masked. Wrapped against the cold. His affliction worsens, But his presence on the battlefield turned fear into courage. The Pope nodded slowly, hands folded atop his staff. The Lord works in strange vessels. There was a murmur of assent. The mood was shifting, from suspicion to wonder, from hesitation to contemplation. But it is not only war he wages, Odo continued. The king is laying down works of lasting stone. The fortress at Jacob's Ford continues, now bolstered by new pulleys and counterweight cranes that allow heavier stones to be lifted with fewer laborers. He's organized construction around pre-cut blocks, arranged like puzzle pieces, faster than any method I've seen in our own lands. You've said this before, said Cardinal Bernard. But it still sounds more like legend. It is no legend, Odo replied. The same systems are being installed near Acre and along the eastern marches. His engineers are planning a string of fortified way stations to protect trade routes and pilgrims. The Pope tapped a finger against the armrest of his throne and the Liber Throni Petri. A subtle smile touched Odo's lips. In use, Holiness. Already in use. Bishops in the Holy Land are receiving copies. Priests are being trained to use them in daily mass. The consistency has created uniformity in homilies. The binding is sturdy, the print clear. And copies are being made even now, at a pace unmatched by any scriptorium. Cardinal Romano leaned forward. And is he still restricting them to the clergy? Yes, Odo confirmed. For now. He is cautious. He has not given the scriptures to laymen, though his clerics speak often of education, and of preparing the faithful for deeper catechesis and the press itself. Odo nodded. There is only one at present. But they are constructing a second. Smaller, for testing. He's ordered ink to be produced in standard batches, again, through a formula. I did not recognize. The Pope turned to the room. We have heard much of his innovations. And we've all read the king's letter, included with a gospel gift. Cardinal Amato interjected. His language is careful, humble, even. But his actions hint at more order, the Pope said gently. Let us speak plainly. Baldwin is no fool. He understands the danger of changing too much, too quickly. But he acts, nonetheless. The chamber grew quiet. He wins battles, said Cardinal Bernard. He builds fortresses. He prints the word. Shall we fear him for that? We must watch him, said Romano. Great kings often forget their place beneath heaven. The Pope stood, his voice calm but final. Then let us watch him closely. But let us not forget, Jerusalem stands stronger than it has in decades. A leper king holds back the armies of the Saracen and delivers us scripture more enduring than vellum. He turned to Odo. You will return in spring. Speak again with this king. Encourage moderation. Offer guidance. And learn all you can. Odo bowed low. I shall, Holiness. The Pope looked again to the Liber Throni Petri, resting on the side altar beneath a golden cloth. Strange days. And stranger still may come outside. The wind howled across the 7 hills, but within the Lateran, thoughts turned eastward, to a young king in silver mask, who walked with pain but fought with fire, and who, perhaps, was changing Christendom one press, one fortress, and one soul at a time. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 49, Fractures in the Crescent. Date, December 1178. Location, Damascus. The heavy scent of incense clung to the air in the Great Hall of Damascus, masking the deeper tension that pulsed like a wound throughout the Ayyubid court. Saladin sat upon a high-backed chair, not a throne, for he was no caliph, but a symbol of his authority nonetheless. The banners of Islam hung overhead, their green and black cloths rippling lightly in the winter drafts. Around him, the emirs murmured in cautious tones, their voices clipped and wary, their expressions a mask of courtesy over concern. A fire from the brazier crackled, throwing light across the face of Emir Taqi-Eldin, Saladin's nephew and one of his most loyal lieutenants. He had returned from the failed assault at Jacob's Ford only days ago, his pride wounded more deeply than his sword arm, which still bore a healing gash. His voice was the first to break the murmuring. We underestimated him again. The king of Jerusalem is no mere child wearing a crown. His men held firm, and his trap, it was no accident. That battlefield was prepared with cunning. We marched into a net of spears. A few heads nodded. Others looked away. Saladin, face grim, remained silent for a long moment before finally speaking. He has reshaped his army into something else, something I have not seen among the Franks before. Order. Discipline. Resolve. This is no longer the Crusader rabble of old. The murmurs rose again. Emir Ibn al-Azraq, The governor of Hama leaned forward, eyes narrowed. But is it true, then, that he built this new fortress at Jacob's Ford in mere months? That his engineers used machines not seen even in Constantinople? He asked. Saladin's chief engineer, Muzaffar, nodded reluctantly. They have cranes, devices with winding mechanisms, pulleys, levers. The fortress was rising faster than we believed possible. And their weapons, there are new devices that launch a hail of bolts. A mockery of our own archery, but faster and more dreadful. Blasphemy, some say, muttered one of the clerics behind the Emir al-Hussein of Aleppo, a portly man in his 50s with a hawkish nose and fine silks, frowned. And what of the losses? My cousin's son was captured. Hanged, I hear. 4,000 lie buried or rotting by the Jordan. How long can we absorb this? Saladin's jaw tightened. We recover. We always recover. But his words rang hollow in the echoing chamber. Al-Hussein pressed further. And what of the north? Rumsters again. The Byzantines moved with greater confidence after the Franks' victories. Your absence from Egypt has weakened our hold on Cairo's emirs. If you fall, the whole house of Ayyub may collapse. Watch your tongue, snapped Taqi al-Din. The Sultan has brought unity to lands torn by 100 petty lords. You speak as if you forget what chaos reigned before his rise, but the challenge was already in the air. Others leaned forward, emboldened. And yet it is that same unity, murmured Emir Nur al-Din of Baalbek, that makes the cracks more dangerous when they appear. One victory by the Leper King would have been tolerable. 2? And now the rumors spread like wildfire. Some say he has divine favor. That he is protected by relics of old. Saladin stood, suddenly, his voice cutting through the murmurs like a blade. No relic guards him. No angel watches over Jerusalem. It is knowledge, engineering, discipline. That is the foundation he builds upon, and we must do the same. Silence fell. He turned to Muzaffar. Begin drafting new designs. Trebuchets of greater range. More wagons for supply. We must learn, adapt, or we will lose this war. Muzaffar bowed. At once, Sultan Saladin turned next to his scribes. Send word to Mosul and Aleppo. Call forth more men. Riders from the desert. Archers from the highlands. We strike again before he grows stronger. He paused, gauging the room. But we will not strike blindly. This time, we choose the battlefield still. Even as the orders rippled outward, Saladin could feel it, the brittle, fracturing edge of loyalty. Some would obey. Others would wait. And some might reach out in secret to their enemies. For now, they remained in his camp. But for how long? Later that month, Jerusalem. The winter sun filtered through the narrow windows of the citadel in Jerusalem as Baldwin IV, still masked in silver, read the latest reports with quiet intensity. The scouts had returned from the eastern passes, confirming what he had suspected. Saladin was not retreating for good. His forces were regrouping, scarred, reduced, but not broken. Ethan, inhabiting Baldwin's body still, knew better than to believe any single victory was enough. We bloodied his nose, Balian said, seated across from him, a cup of spiced wine warming his hands. But he is not a man to forget. The next blow will come, whether in a month or a year. Then we sharpen the sword while we can, Baldwin replied. And we build. The work on Jacob's Ford resumed under renewed protection. The fortress, now rising beyond its early outer walls, would take years to complete, but its foundations were strong. The engineers, under both Frankish and Eastern Christian direction, utilized pulley systems that halved construction time compared to older methods. Quarry stones from the nearby hills were hoisted with precise, coordinated effort. Iron rebar, an unheard-of addition to medieval walls, was being slowly introduced under the pretense of reinforced design. Are we seeing settlers? Balian asked, shifting topics more each week. Baldwin said. Pilgrims, artisans from Pisa and southern France, even some Armenians from Cilicia. And I intend to settle them where we can hold, not just defend. He rolled out a map. The next phase is the highlands east of Galilee. Fortify the hilltops. Set down villages with granaries, cisterns, and enough farmland to feed themselves through siege. These will be the seeds of our next border. Balian nodded slowly. You are planting a kingdom. Not merely holding one. A servant entered with a sealed scroll. The wax bore the cross of Rome. Baldwin took it, read in silence, then handed it to Balian. The Pope has declared our victory a sign of divine favor. He calls for patience before declaring another crusade, but offers continued support. Gold, some relics, and more importantly, men. The next batch of Knights Hospitaller will sail within the season. And what of Constantinople? The Byzantines remain cautious but intrigued. They send more diplomats soon. If we continue winning, we may no longer be just a kingdom, Balian said. Eyes wide no, Baldwin agreed. We may become the bulwark. Chapter 50, Whispers of Steel. December 28, 1178 Jerusalem Citadel. Jerusalem sat under the cool hush of winter, the city's narrow stone streets veiled in frost and quiet prayer. Inside the royal citadel, behind high walls and columns hung with crimson banners, a council gathered once again. The brazier crackled as firelight cast flickering shadows across the war maps of Outremer. King Baldwin IV stood masked and still, eyes focused on the parchment before him, surrounded by his closest advisors, Balian of Ibelin, Grand Master Odo of St. Emond, and several trusted military scribes. The fraying of the Ayyubid cloth. We've confirmed it now from 3 separate sources, Balian said, placing down a scroll. Saladin's grip on the northern territories is beginning to falter. Hama and Aleppo are tense. There's even rumor of dissent in Baalbek. Baldwin's voice was low but firm. We continue the work. No direct contacts, only suggestions and stories planted in the mouths of merchants and caravanners. The fear must grow on its own. Without our fingerprints they're afraid already, Odo added. Especially now that they've seen their sultan beaten twice. And if they were unsure of his strength, then they'll hesitate to send him troops when he needs them most. Good, Baldwin murmured. That's exactly what we want. A letter from Rome. A young cleric entered, bearing a scroll bearing the seal of the Holy See. Baldwin opened the missive and read silently, his breath visible in the winter air. He passed it to Balian, who read aloud, to Baldwin, King of Jerusalem, defender of the Holy City, your recent triumphs in battle and governance have stirred hope across Christendom. Know that the Church stands ready to lend spiritual and moral support should the kingdom seek to restore Christian lands to the east. Choose wisely the sword's direction, and the cross shall follow. Balian finished, and the room fell silent. They will not launch a crusade blindly, Baldwin said. They want to know our intentions. Our plan. Then the question becomes, Odo said, stepping closer to the map, where do we strike? Turning the gaze north. Baldwin's gloved hand moved over the map, first brushing against Egypt and Gaza, then pulling away. Egypt is fortified. Our border castles and redoubts hold steady. Saladin can't move from Cairo without risking exposure elsewhere. He knows it, and we know it. He tapped the region north of Damascus. Syria is the real danger. Aleppo, Homs, Baalbek. They've provided the core of Saladin's northern strength, and they connect him to Mosul and his eastern support. Odo's eyes narrowed. You're suggesting an assault into Syria. I'm suggesting we present Rome with a clear and ambitious objective, a campaign to reclaim the Christian towns of Syria, those that once answered to Antioch and Constantinople before they fell to the sword. Balian nodded slowly. If we can divide Syria from the rest of the Ayyubid lands, we strangle Saladin's reach. His armies will be isolated. And with unrest growing already, a war in Syria might tip them into outright rebellion. Campaign objectives. Baldwin turned to the scribe. Write to Rome, to Genoa, to Pisa. Frame the campaign in clear terms. Aleppo and Homs must be the primary targets. Baalbek, if we can hold the heights. And if God grants us favor, and Europe sends sufficient arms, then perhaps even Damascus. Damascus? Odo asked, slightly surprised. Baldwin gave a small nod. It was Christian once. The Eastern Roman Empire ruled it. Let them remember that. But we do not start there, we build to it. Balian added, and if we take Baalbek, the valley road to Damascus lies open. With Aleppo and Homs cut off, the city will have no reinforcements. Exactly, Baldwin said. We must frame this not as a holy frenzy, but as a methodical restoration of the ancient Christian East. A rightful return, not a reckless charge. Diplomacy and tactics. They spent the next hours drafting letters and laying the foundation for the diplomatic campaign to follow. Envoys would be sent not just to Rome, but to the courts of France, England, the Holy Roman Empire, and the maritime republics at the same time. Baldwin issued quiet orders to his engineers and builders. Forts along the eastern roads would be repaired. Winter stockpiles would be gathered at the northernmost supply posts. Veterans from Jacob's Ford would be rotated north to form the seed of a forward army. This campaign will be slower than Jacob's Ford, Baldwin admitted to Odo. We will need time to build the case, prepare the roads, soften their ranks. Odo nodded. But when the moment comes, we strike fast. Saladin must not be given time to rally Egypt, a kingdom that endures. As the meeting adjourned, Baldwin stood at the window overlooking the holy city. The bells of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre echoed in the distance. Behind him, his court moved with renewed purpose. He turned to Balian one last time. We may not see the end of this in 1 year. But if we can shatter Syria, we will shatter his empire. And for the first time in decades, The kingdom of Jerusalem will not be on the defense, we will be reclaiming the lands that were taken. Balian smiled faintly to victory. Then, end of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.